today.
Yeah.
Don't forget about those things retired.
Right, exactly.
That I'm a little nervous about.
Good morning, everybody. This is Senate Economic Development, and it is Wednesday, March 29th, 2023. And I'm hoping our chair will be joining us later. She is not able to join us at the moment. So we're going to start, and we welcome everyone who's been working so hard on Vermont Land Access and Opportunity. And we will get to that. And I think we have a lot of people who haven't necessarily been in this committee they may be here for the first time. And so we would love to introduce ourselves to you as a collective. So this is we're missing our chair, Keisha Ron Hinsdale, and I'm Allison Clarkson. I'm Windsor County District.
Ann Cummings from Washington County. Yes.
Wendy Harrison, Wyndham County, and this is my first stint as a state senator.
And Randy Broad, Franklin County, and part of Grand Isle County.
Right. So we appreciate that this work was launched in last year's legislative session. And we appreciate that we are going to this morning, get an update on the report that was submitted to this committee about a month ago, I think, and get an update on their work because the board is less than a year old, right? Mm-hmm. So, and we're excited about this work. We have helped enable this work, and we're ready to go, I think. So take it away.
Okay. So for the record, Gus Seelig with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And why don't we have, going to hear in a moment from Pastor Arnold Thomas and Attorney Robert Appel and Jess Laporte, who is a member of the board. And also in the room is Kirsten Murphy, and Reverend Mark Hughes was here a second ago and will likely return.
Mark, has his, you never quite fully know where Mark might be. He has many committees he engages with.
He has many. And I'm going to be very brief, but to say that when you included the establishment of Land Access Opportunity Board in the statute last year, you asked the Housing and Conservation Board to be its administrative home. Trey Martin has been our lead staff person, and he'll drive the slideshow today. But I'm just going to say, for me, this has been an honor of my lifetime to be asked to support these folks in the work they're doing. They've been meeting every 2 weeks since late summer and delivered a report to you about 4 weeks ago that they'll talk about a little later today. But this is, for me, a larger context. So the cover of this Smithsonian is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, which I attended as a 7-year-old. My dad, I'd like to tell you that I remember Dr. King's speech. The truth is, the only thing I remember is Mahalia Jackson singing. But
you know what? That's a great thing to remember.
If
that's all you took away, that's not bad.
That's a wonderful memory. And I'd say the establishment of this board is part of a continuation of work that this body has been doing over several years in establishing an Office of Racial Equity and working on health equity. And the members of the board are going to be far more articulate about all of that than I could be. But I'm really pleased it's professional development for my staff and I to be supporting these folks in their work. And with that, I'm going to stop talking because they're the people that you need to hear from.
Other than teasing us with that, could we all have a chance to take a peek at it later? I mean, not now.
But what's significant and not on the cover, and I have 2 souvenirs from that day, and one is the program that sits above my desk. And it doesn't just say we shall overcome or March on Washington for freedom. It says March on Washington for jobs and freedom. That's right. And I think the importance of that was people who were leading that effort understood that it wasn't just a matter of there being public accommodations, freedom to travel, voting rights. It was also about leveling the playing field in terms of quality of life that all of us as Americans want to have. And I think that this board is to continue that work and that spirit and that thought that we need economic opportunity for everyone in this country. So with that, I'm going to give way to Pastor Thomas.
Thank you, Gus.
Thank you, Gus.
We need to have you come and join us here because sadly, now that we're all streamed live and on this little machine here, we need to have you in front of the camera.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's not too intimidating.
I think you've been on hotter seats.
Yeah, well, you should also know that as a Lutheran minister, I try to confine my remarks to no more than 10 minutes.
Oh, I thought that was an Episcopalian thing.
Oh, that's.
So I think of Lutherans speak 20 like
No,
Presbyterians.
no. Like the Episcopalians, we have that communion every Sunday, so. we have-
Definitely not Baptist.
Definitely not that. Although I grew up in that church, but I lived swiftly left.
Oh, an
Anyway.
intentional choice. Ooh.
Anyway, my name is Arnold Isidore Thomas. I am pastor of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Jericho, Vermont, and a member of the Vermont Land Access and Opportunities Board, representing the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance on that board. As you earlier mentioned, the Land Access and Opportunities Board, sometimes referred to as LOAB, was created by the Vermont General Assembly in 2022 under the Act 182 in acknowledgement of structural racism and prevalent wealth disparities in Vermont. We were created and in an attempt to improve access to land and home ownership for Vermonters of historically marginalized and disadvantaged communities who continue to face barriers of land and home ownership. The Federal Fair Housing Act was part of the civil rights legislation in 1968, making it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, and sex. In 1988, Congress added familial status and disability to the Housing Act, and further added was protection categories for marital status, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, receipt of public assistance, and victims of abuse.
Can I just interrupt? She's okay.
I hope.
So, yeah, I just want you, she has a larynx thing.
Should I
but-
wait until?
No, but maybe just go back a couple sentences if you don't mind, just because
That was a
I
little
was
distracting
distracted.
for a minute.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
Randy's in charge. You're the ranking member.
Oh my God,
Oh, okay.
y'all are really passing right here a lot today.
I think though that it would be useful. Go back a sentence or so and go forward in case our members were.
Okay.
Thank you.
As I said, the Federal Fair Housing Act, Gus mentioned the March on Washington in 1963. Well, as an offshoot of that effort, the Federal Fair Housing Act was part of the Civil Rights Legislation Act of 1968, making it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, and sex. In 1988, Congress added familial status and disability to the categories protected under that law. Vermont's Fair Housing Act is similar to federal law with 6 additional protected categories: marital status, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, receipt of public assistance, and victims of abuse. As a board, we represent various marginalized communities. The NAACP, the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, of which I am a member, LGBTQ Vermonters, mentally and physically challenged Vermonters, Indigenous Vermonters, and refugees and immigrants who seek stability partly through access to affordable land and housing. To this end, we will seek, welcome back. Hope you're feeling better.
Oh, I'm fine. It happens all the time. It's my committee notes.
Okay.
You know, this is all jumped up.
I don't often leave the room.
That's all right. Glad to have you back. As I was mentioning, to this end, we will seek funding through the state government that created us in an effort to create the means by which such properties can be attained in the hope of making Vermont the envy and example of other states as to what an affordable and welcoming state can be. We desire to create an administrative infrastructure that will reach out to and assess the needs of the state's historically marginalized communities regarding their housing and land needs, to assess how we might provide a less intimidating bureaucratic means for guiding them through the process of home and land ownership, and to create a living environment where they can feel secure and stable enough to plant roots and contribute to the economic development of our state. April is National Fair Housing Month, which celebrates the passage of the Fair Housing Act. However, despite the many achievements made since the law was passed over 50 years ago, Black, Indigenous, people of color, mentally and physically disabled residents, along with residents who cannot afford the high cost of housing in Vermont, have yet to achieve equality in housing opportunity. In his Fair Housing Month proclamation in April of 2022, Governor Scott encouraged the state to take steps to ensure fair housing by prohibiting discrimination against housing development in land use and planning decisions based on the income of intended residents, and to assure fairness in all housing transactions and strive to be a welcoming place where opportunity is accessible to all and where the safety and security of a home is not obstructed by discrimination. However, the goal will be a tough Green Mountain decline. Vermont remains one of the least racially and culturally diverse states in the nation and has one of the highest home ownership gaps between Black and white residents in this country. 72% of white Vermonters own their homes, compared to 24% of Black Vermonters. High home prices, in addition to other discriminatory factors against people of color, low-income families with children, and people with physical and mental disabilities, are pushing home ownership out of reach for many first-time home buyers. The Vermont Housing Finance Agency reported that rates of Vermont's disparate housing outcomes are complex and far-reaching, but is especially acknowledged that the housing need of non-white Vermonters are caused by decades of structural racism in national public policy, including systematized racism, discrimination in housing, in employment, as well as in education. This has led to a generational wealth gap between whites and non-white Vermonters, which appear to be widening. Reversing this trend and achieving equal housing outcomes will require significant public investment, including but not limited to increasing rental and home ownership opportunities, expanded access to credit, reinforced consumer protection, and rigorous enforcement of fair housing laws. This is, again, according to the Vermont Fair Housing Agency. Vermont is a tough nut to crack. And the mountain that we will have to climb to achieve our goals will be enormous. And Vermont Land Access and Opportunities Board intends to work with and complement other existing state boards and agencies in developing the means by which this obstacle can be overcome. You created us, the State House, the state legislature, the state Senate created us. Give us the means to make you proud, but also give us the means to make our state a shining example from which other states may learn what it means to be, in the words of our governor, a welcoming place where opportunity is accessible to all, and where the safety and security of a home is not obstructed by discrimination. Thank you for your considerations and your time.
Thank you so much. Have you submitted your testimony to Scott
No, I have
electronically?
not.
We would appreciate it if you would,
Okay.
and that's
Right.
true for everybody. That would be great.
Let me
Thanks.
make room for the next person.
Sure. Or does anyone have a question?
Yes.
Dr. Thomas?
It's
Oh,
good to see
great.
a lot of familiar faces here.
Well, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much. I guess I would just ask, and I forgot to ask Gus this question. Does any other state have something equivalent to the Land Access and Opportunity Board? No. Okay, Rob is gonna speak that. Great. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. And are we going to hear from, is Jess next or? Yeah,
We're gonna
Jess
have
is-
Robert and then Jess.
Okay, great. Oh, Robert. Oh,
Good morning, all. It's been a long time since I've seen a number of you. Senator Harrison, we've not
I
met.
was gonna say maybe never. Hi.
Yeah. I'll tell you who I am.
I'm in Wyndham County, so it's Brattleboro, Bellas Falls, Dover.
And my three colleagues I've worked with in years past. My background is, I've been involved in law for 45 years. My work has been between indigent criminal defense, juvenile work, and civil rights enforcement. I was in the AG's office both as an investigator, lead attorney in the Civil Rights Division. And I was Attorney General before Matt Valerio for 8 years, and then I was Director of the Human Rights Commission for 10 years. I retired from state in 2012. I don't come around much anymore.
I know, we miss you. The basketball team misses you too.
Days gone by. I'm too
Yeah,
old.
yeah.
I'm too old. My knees are shot. But on to more important things. So I saw this as an opportunity for me to become re-involved with younger folks who are picking up the baton and doing the work. And I'm very impressed by the members of the board. Very thankful for the support of the HCB, which has been a great partner, as has Gus. And I think this is an important initiative. I do want to say a couple of things following what Reverend Thomas said, which is Mahalia Jackson ended up singing at the Lincoln Memorial because Daughters of the American Revolution wouldn't let her sing Constitution Hall.
Right.
So that's 60 years ago. And we've come some, but there's a lot more to go. And when Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, he was there supporting sanitation workers strike. And he was a considerable threat to the status quo with a renewed March on Washington that to happen that August, which he didn't make, for jobs and justice. The Fair Housing Act was passed 1 week to the day after King's assassination. It was a way that President Johnson, through his knowledge of Congress, was able to leverage the support necessary to get the Fair Housing Act through. And our State Fair Housing Act has been deemed substantially equivalent with the federal. HUD sends some money to the Human Rights Commission to do enforcement. Not too many people know that resource, and it's tough to prove cases. So I think we as a community need to do more. And when I got involved with this work early on, my proposal was a rising tide floats all boats. And the target population that was created by the enabling statute is very, very broad. For the first time in my knowledge, it protects people based on socioeconomic status. I had the opportunity to visit the county seat in Franklin County yesterday, and Route 15, there's a big wealth disparity, as Senator Brock certainly knows in his community and all your communities. And people are stuck in poverty. And there are systemic obstacles that prevent people from moving forward. And this board purpose is to identify and remove those barriers, including barriers in finance, barriers in enforcement, barriers in land use, regulation, etc. And like I said, the board members have been terrific in getting this thing up. Now's the time to move it forward. The budget ask is to provide for some staff. Board members wear a number of varied hats, and they're busy folks, and they devote what time they have. But if we're serious about moving forward on this initiative, we need to fund a position or two. And I know that that's a challenge in this time. It's always a challenge, but you have to pick your priorities. So the report. I know there's been some pushback about the constitutionality of this effort. I think it's misguided. We're not talking about race preference, which obviously is a hot topic these days, given what's sitting before the Supreme Court. We're talking about analyzing and dismantling systemic obstacles to a broad range of people, Black folks among them, Indigenous people among them, people with disabilities among them, people who have been traditionally deprived of access to funding, resources, and good employment, safe housing. So I understand that Legislative Council has concern. We're trying to address that and hope to have an opportunity to discuss it directly with those concerned. Ultimately, it's your call. We don't see it as an equal protection challenge because it's not targeted towards any particular race or group. It's sort of a lot of people in this boat. And I think that negates equal protection challenge based on race preference. California has been toying. The question came from your interim chair. I hope.
The vice chair. I'm just stepping.
Well, I wish the best for Senator Graham Hinsdale. Sorry, she's not with us today. I know she's supportive of this program. So, this is the job of the legislature, is to pass laws that promote the general welfare of the population, and addressing structural barriers, be it racism or minimum lot size, is squarely within your bailiwick. And very encouraging to see this body created last year. Can you go to the next one? Okay.
Yeah, we're there. So,
We're there?
yeah.
All right.
It's just tiny for those of us.
We
will also.
Who are-
Well, you gave us.
And out also.
I hope my
Oh,
voice,
right, of course. Duh, thank you.
I hope my voice isn't done.
Robert, there's nothing about you that's tiny.
Well, I pointed a little head. So the other thing I would add, thanks to Trey's coaching, is any act passed by this body is presumed constitutional, unless until it's successfully challenged in court. Like I said, in your report, and I know I see your papers, I know how much paperwork you have to plow through, but the report goes into considerable detail about equal protection challenges and the legal landscape and what's going on in other jurisdictions. The only state that's really tackling it at this point is California, and you talk about a big state. All the other efforts are very nascent. There's some municipalities who have dealt with this. Evansville in Illinois is one. And they're all in an appendix in the report. I encourage you to find the time to look at those provisions in the report. I think you'll find them very elucidating. And I'm available for questions. I think we want to hold questions to the end.
Yeah.
So thank you for your interest and your time this morning, and hopefully we'll move this budget request along as it comes over from the House.
And I may have missed this, but the budget request is 1.2?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's in the House budget.
Yes,
Okay.
which has yet to pass, but if it's in, it's in. And it's stated.
So it's always a lot easier if it's in.
Hey, I think this is the fanciest chair I've testified in. They usually give us the metal chairs and the other one.
Yeah. Come to
Uh,
find
we
it,
want
we
our-
have a nice chair. Just for that reason.
My name is Jessica Port. I identify with she, her pronouns. Was born and raised in Lamoille County, which is also where my mother was born and raised. And I moved back to Vermont after a number of years away in 2020, not planned before the pandemic broke out. And so I've been back for the past few years, and I actually am a constituent of yours. I moved out to Duxbury with my sister and her partner,
Okay. so-
I believe. Yeah. And I live with them. We're a multi-family household. I'm mostly going to focus on the budget request, but then I would like to share a little bit of why I'm so passionate about this work. So you heard about what the Land Access and Opportunity was created to do. And also that there, is a strong legal argument for pursuing this work, despite concerns around constitutionality when it was originally introduced. This idea was introduced as H-273, and that was focused on BIPOC land access, but it's been expanded to protected classes. And I think our budget recommendation of 1.2 million, and what is written in the House is also that's the first of 4 years of baseline funding. So when you're thinking about this 1.2, it's really about a capacity building budget in order to establish this board and establish the functions of the board. And particularly in this idea that this board can be a partner for legislators who are asking these questions of how do we do what is best for our constituents in these complex situations. I often, in my work in climate justice, I talk about the intersections of marginalization. And I think something we're discovering just by bringing this board together is for ourselves. We might work with certain organizations that focus on certain protected classes. And that's not the terminology we use in our everyday work, but it's what we use for this board. But what we're finding is the overlap in experience, but also the distinctiveness and the differences. And what we hope to offer the state, both through in this initial budget, we've budgeted for a couple kind of research type projects where we can familiarize ourselves. We're just everyday residents of Vermont, but where the board can familiarize ourselves with what's already happening in housing and land ownership. How are people from our constituents, so of these different protected classes, impacted by those programs? And then to begin to try to weave together more comprehensive programs, bring that efficiency. So staff is a major part of that. Trey probably gets too many emails from me on a daily basis because we are really relying on the administrative support of the HCB until we bring on staff. But I also think that it's a strategic choice to continue to, in our Sunrise report, to continue in our relationship with BHCB, because what you're not seeing here is a blown out of proportion budget in order to handle the administrative and financial responsibilities of being a state funded agency. So I think we're in the 1.2, we're able to both chart a path towards capacity building to do this actual work. And we will likely be back in future years to say, now that we've looked at what we want to be involved in, this is where we believe that the state can put some funding to be really strategic and to support really honestly grassroots work, right? Like actually seeing each of our member organizations as experts in navigating public, state, and local resources for people of these different groups. And I don't know if you, because of the tiny text, if you absorbed the member organizations. I don't know if you.
Yes, it was on an earlier slide.
Yes, on an earlier slide. But just taking a look at these organizations as senators, right? One of my questions is, how many of these organizations are you familiar with?
Probably all.
Hopefully all of them. And also, most of these organizations never show up in the State House. They're very much so like community-based organizations that are statewide networks, local-based resource navigators, and community gatherers. And so I think out of these, you might see one or two,
Actually, you know
maybe
what?
three.
Yes, we see them, pretty much all of them in some capacity in this building.
So we have a few of them that are state bodies.
Yeah, well, in GovOps we do.
Yes, yeah, a few of them are state bodies that are represented, but a lot of them are also community-based organizations.
Yeah.
And I myself am just learning what it means to show up in the State House and to advocate. So what I guess in thinking about this budget, I just wanted to maybe share a couple of the thought puzzles that I feel like this board might think about in our work. So one example, which I feel like Kirsten's testimony reminded me of, thinking about our existing affordable housing and ownership programs, and a lot of them focus around maybe like a forgivable loan for a down payment or other assistance. But if you've been living for decades or even just a few years with a physical disability or developmental disability your whole life, you're likely trying to create an economic situation where you qualify for public benefits, which means you're also creating an economic situation in which you are not a strong candidate for a loan. So if we predicate all of our programs on the ability to get a loan and then help with that loan, you're actually leaving out large swaths of the population that rely on Medicaid and other disability benefits in order to make all of their other ends meet. And what we end up saying as a society is if you qualify for those, then you shouldn't be a homeowner, when actually you need and deserve the most housing security of everyone, right? You, especially if you need an ADA accessible home and unit, you are a headache for your landlord and often pushed out of your housing. Another problem that we might think about is actually something that's very personal to me, the immigration process. So I'm a US citizen, born and raised in Vermont, but I'm in the immigration process with my partner. And I'm just barely middle class now, which is great, grew up below the poverty line. But I have a bunch of what I call unrecognized dependents. I support a household in Haiti through my income that will never be recognized by the US government. The IRS does not care. They will eventually recognize that my husband exists and I will have a brief period where he is a dependent. For many people, whether themselves immigrating or connected to immigration, we have these unrecognized dependents, which means that you're trying to have the strongest economic situation possible. But it also means that you're more likely, like myself, to live in multi-generational, multi-family homes, which again, when we boil everything down to an economic indicator to be able to qualify for housing support, when you put the three incomes in my household together, we don't qualify for Efficiency Vermont. When you put 3 or 4 incomes together with unrecognized dependents, you suddenly make too much for most of these programs, but you've come into one household for a reason, right? So I personally don't know the answer to how the LAOB would look at either of these thought problems, but I think that these are the questions we're going to ask. And I think that this is where we're not going to say we're taking over other state programs, but where we can help to inform and advise on state programs, and where there are gaps, maybe create programs to meet those specific needs. So I hope that it was maybe illuminating of what we would actually do, because I think a lot of people are like, we have all these other agencies that work on affordable housing and home ownership, and we have Working Lands that's looking at land ownership, but we're trying to figure out how people in these complex situations actually qualify and benefit. Yeah.
So time for questions.
Yes, I'm happy to stay here, but also I almost want to get out of the chair so that anyone could answer a question. But.
Well, and that, absolutely, that is possible. Anyone can answer a question. With Jeff, that is the final crowd that are testifying, or is Mark testifying?
I was gonna let Gus just wrap up if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, great.
Always wrap up.
Forgot about that.
All right. Well,
Don't go to the chair closest.
You
to
could actually wrap up from right there.
Oh,
because
really?
The camera
I'm gonna
is
be
zooming
very-
right
Oh,
at
great.
you.
I'm going to be very brief, which is to say that, again, this has been terrific work that folks have been doing over a long period since last summer, every 2 weeks and relentlessly. But also say that from my perspective, and Robert was brought on to specifically address some of the legal questions, this is an evolutionary step. And when you read his report, you'll find that he's would classify most of the activities that the board will undertake as very low risk in terms of challenge. And as I've listened to and heard from the board over many months, I'm absolutely convinced that they will make the work of the Housing Conservation Board better, all of our community partners better, as well as other agencies across the state, because they are going to bring a perspective that we just, as much as we have empathy and our own experience in life, they're going to bring a different dimension to that experience that will be of value to all of us.
No, absolutely, and value as we craft legislation. So, we're just in the process of passing a housing bill that where we've tried to incorporate some of those things, and we've certainly created programs to address some of them, but it'll be wonderful to have a partner that is more fully versed on some of this. I guess I have a question about the money piece, about the employees. Are they going to be employees of VHCB and you'll be a division of, basically for purposes of money, you'd be a division of VHCB?
So what we've discussed, and we haven't worked out all the details, but I think Kirsten's noted that while she's located, her organization is located within the Agency of Human Services and Developmental Disabilities Council, there's an MOU between the council and the Agency of Human Services. So it's not our intention. So yes, whoever's hired is an employee of the Housing Conservation Board, but their actions and work will be directed by this board.
Got it. I assume that. And so, right.
And we'll work out the details of how that's going to work through a memorandum of understanding.
Great. And I know you're already working, I mean, here's Chad, so you're clearly already, I assume, working closely with VHCB. Okay.
Chad Simmons, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Our agency is supportive of these efforts and
Well,
extremely interested to see how we can continue to participate.
and been working on this as we passed last year in our housing bill, the first-time home ownership down payment assistance piece, which is where I think we first, I mean, you've been obviously working on these issues for a while, but I mean, that was a very direct example of how we can begin to tackle the challenge of the incredible gap of homeownership.
I think the first generation home buyer program is a good example of how we can continue to improve. And some of the things that was brought up, I think would need to be addressed in how we look at credit, how we look at how more folks can access homeownership through these programs. And I think we would be best served, as Gus was saying, to be able to have a board that can influence how these programs are developed.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's great, and thank you. And I'm new to this, but it's wonderful work. So I was gonna ask you about the first generation home ownership, because we did change it in the bill that we're proposing now, and hopefully you looked at it, or maybe you should at some point if you have time. And VHF, they can explain it better than I can, but it was to make it more accessible to people, because there were folks who weren't qualifying, because both parents had to have not had homes. So now it's one of the, if two people are buying a house, it's just one of them who has to have that qualification. So hopefully that would help. But yeah, you could be a resource for all sorts of things that we're doing. Be wonderful. And I actually don't know all of these entities, so I appreciate you saying that. And I am involved in some refugee work in Brattleboro. There's now a center down there, ECDC. And so can they be part of this if they want to be, and CAS is there too? Or are they aware of this
I would say,
effort?
so these are the 11 nominating organizations, and I will also say, I forgot to say which board seat I sit on. I'm with the Everytown BIPOC Access Project.
Okay,
So these are the current 11 nominating orgs. We did in our Sunrise report revisit, like, should we consider adding more or changing some? But for right now, we're gonna kind of move forward with these nominating orgs, but our meetings are open to the public.
good.
And our hope is that through some of the items budgeted in our $1.2 million ask, we'd be able to engage more. Both all of the 11 nominated orgs would like to engage our organizations and membership more, and hopefully other groups.
That's great.
I'd add to that,
Mark, just identify yourself.
I'm sorry, I'm Reverend Mark Hughes, the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance Executive Director. I would add to that the NAACP is one of the members, and there are currently 2 and soon to be 3 chapters of the NAACP. They are statewide.
Right, and one's in Barbara. too.
One's in Windsor, one's in Wyndham,
Yeah.
and then I think the other.
And
one's-
Rutland.
But the 2 that I named, one is gonna be up in May. I forget, I get Windsor and Wyndham, I get. mixed up.
Windsor, we're the latecomers.
Okay, so that's happening, and so they are statewide, so you got Mia and Stefan
Right.
and those folks.
Right.
I wanted to also add, concerning the budget, the $1.2 million ask. To Justin's point, part of that will be allocated to that outreach. But I wanted to also come full circle back to just understanding the value that this board is currently sanctioned to offer today. Because there is an advisory capacity that, I know Gus just mentioned the value that this board adds just to this organization alone. Even now, there's been a transformative difference just because of our interactions, and I think Trey would attest to a lot of what I'm saying too, is we've had some great and really rich and sometimes difficult conversations that have advanced the perspective of VHCB. But the Vermont Economic Development Authority is also another one of the folks that we are charged to advise, as well as the Vermont Agricultural Credit Corporation and other affordable housing and land access stakeholders. So there are, we're called to work with the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, Departments of Financial Regulation and Housing and Community Development, the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, the Vermont State Housing Authority. So there's a broad range of consultative capacity that we need to build in order to function like this. And there's huge value to develop.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
great. And I just wanted to just one
Because
other
I know
thing.
Randy has a question.
Okay, yeah, which is thanks for being specific. I so appreciate really specific things like the unrecognized dependents. That's just so important
Yeah.
because if you can't make it work for banks and insurance companies, then it's really hard.
Yeah.
So if we can know the barriers, those really specific barriers, then that's
Yeah,
something
I
that we
agree.
can do.
Yep,
So
and
thank you.
That's one of the tasks that we're charging Hope for staff members to do equity studies among all these groups. So there would be, engagement of equity lens at the various components of our somewhat disjointed housing organizations, which
No.
was struck me 10 years ago when I was at the commission. There's a lot of different housing outfits out there. There was a Fair Housing Council for getting coordination.
well, and after Randy asks a question, I have to follow up on that coordination question. Randy had a question.
I think you mentioned that there is some legal analysis paper that you've done.
Yeah.
Do you have a copy of that?
It's in the report.
It's in the report, and the report's on our website.
It is on our
Under-
website.
I'd be happy to send you those.
Okay. And Scott, if you'd be kind enough to send a link out, just currently an email to the committee so that we have it at the top of our.
The second
Of
issue,
our
I think you
email.
mentioned that there was pushback from Ledge Council regarding constitutional issues. Could you tell me what those are? At least briefly.
Well, as you probably know, there's this case sitting with the nine justices in DC challenging race consciousness in Michigan, University of North Carolina. This court has been very unfriendly to anything that smacks of race consciousness. So we're certainly cognizant of that. And the body was cognizant of that when it created this board because it is a broad target. I mean, it's not just race. I mean, historically, it's easier to demonstrate historical discrimination against Black folks between redlining, GI Bill not working for Black vets. You can go on and on about that's an easier documentation. In order to defeat an equal protection challenge, we hope to gather more information. If we can show that this is targeted to documented instances of discrimination from better ground, and that's we're talking about listening sessions around the state to get those stories. So we're certainly cognizant that there might be forces out there that are not going to support this, and that's my goal in working with the school is to try to make those likelihood of success challenge. And that's what we're doing.
I also think like what is in the report also lays out that this board is not going to be saying you're eligible for this program if you are X, Y, and Z. But what we hope to do is leverage these statewide networks, groups that are focused on navigating resources for people of protected classes so that they can help the programs reach that last mile, right? Like actually get to the application getting in for a program, and also that awareness of what is available to folks. So we want to make, as a state board, be able to actually leverage this broader network to make any existing program more effective. But we're not, our board would never be like, you can get this grant if you are this specific, lived experience. It would be much more like, this is going to be it's going to be built with an awareness of these different challenges. And then we're going to leverage community-based organizations to be able to reach the people who would qualify.
It seems like I'm hearing two things. The first, I'm hearing on the examples that you used about some existing programs being unable to deal with situations that are different than stock situations, such as the multiple persons in a family unit and the inability to seek benefits as a result. That's one. On the other hand, what I'm also hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there are some programs that are insensitive to particular groups or categories of people who are protected classes. So my first question on that is, in the examples that you mentioned, such as the family situation or the situation of the person with a disability who has a different need for permanent housing, perhaps, than a lower income person otherwise. Are you aware that the agencies that are responsible for administering these programs have been presented with those situations and asked to come up with solutions or encouraged to?
Yeah, and I think that the LAOB would be hopefully a centralized long-term partner in that process. So both to legislators, like you all are tweaking a current bill, also to the agencies and the departments themselves, rather than each agency being said, here's this issue with this one program with you. Mm-hmm. We could actually have a broader conversation so that another agency doesn't repeat the same issue, error, or requirement in the coming year or in the coming 5 years, right? Institutional memory is long and also very short. So like, how do we actually pull these different agencies together? And they span from home ownership to also our working lands and the ability to begin, cultivating crops. So I think the hope is, we know that all of these agencies are getting that feedback, and hopefully the Land Access and Opportunity Board is a place to consolidate that work and then to share the learnings. In a similar way, we also have we can be strong partners to Truth and Reconciliation. We can be strong partners to the Vermont Health Equity Coalition, commission, sorry, I always, like the C is, you're like, you just kind of guess on the C. And also there's a new environmental justice, committee, council, steering board, something. There's a thing. And what I think the hope would be is that the Land Access Opportunity Board is a complement to those other initiatives. Everyone's looking at different things. As we look at environmental justice, land ownership and land stewardship is going to come up. We can partner with them on that. When you look at health equity, having a home is a key central part to your health and well-being. How do we partner with them when their findings are around housing? Maybe we can step in. When our findings are around health, we can turn to them, and it can be a reciprocal relationship. And we hope that with all the agencies and departments. But thus far, we've existed for six months, 7 months. We focused on the Sunrise Report. We're here to ask for the capacity that we need so that we can actually begin to be a part of those conversations. We are, not all of us have jobs that are in a related field to being on this board. Many folks, we have a small subgroup of people who are going to be available during the workday in order to show up to this process. So we really lack the resources to begin to do some of the meaningful relationship building and collaboration that will make the board effective. If not, we'll just, if you don't turn to us, we will just be an island, and we actually need to begin to build those bridges.
Well, of course, one of the questions that comes to my mind immediately is that there's an equity component of the responsibility of every agency of state government. Are they meeting those responsibilities?
We don't know.
Yeah. And if not,
Fundamentally,
it seems to be, that a fire would have to be lit to make people do their damn jobs. If this is part of those jobs.
I think, Randy, that's one of the things that Robert was saying when we, that's what you need to study, and then the equity,
equity
do it.
assessments of existing governmental agencies and non-governmental.
How are we doing our job?
And how accessible are the services that these agencies provide to the groups that are, to the breadth of community that is within the catchment of this board, which is extraordinarily.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would guess that I would also hope we aren't duplicating efforts. So we have the Office of Racial Equity also doing a lot of this groundbreaking work, and they are also getting more staff. So we're investing quite a bit. My understanding is I think they're
That's
getting
race.
what?
That's only race.
No, I realize that's, but they are key partners in some of, for example, doing,
Suzanne was on the board.
yeah,
No, they're doing great work, but
no,
That's this.
we're very clear on,
I'm talking about this.
yeah, no.
I guess I went also there, and I also want to acknowledge Reverend Hughes, but I think the makeup of our board is such where we acknowledge the intimidating factor on the part of marginalized communities to even enter this process as far as owning land, owning a home. There are so many competing agendas, so many different ways in which one is encouraged to apply for such a process. It's confusing and it's intimidating. And we're hoping that because our board represents such a variety of marginalized communities that are accessible to those concerns, that we can provide an umbrella that can channel the means of addressing those concerns rather than having people feel that the process is so intimidating and so overwhelming and so conflicted that there is no one means of doing so. We provide that channel.
Absolutely, and I think that whatever helps any protected class access, that helps all Vermonters, because I think many Vermonters beyond protected classes find accessing many of our programs difficult. So we've needed navigation help on healthcare, for example. We've needed navigation help in business and in all sorts of other areas. Navigational help, making everything fairly simple and easy to understand, and useful portals, and helping our citizens navigate, all our citizens navigate the incredible programs that are accessible to them is critically important.
And that's a component of what we hope to have staff do.
Yeah, I understand. And Mark, did I miss you? Did you have your hand up on something? Because we need to end in about 2 minutes.
I was just wanted to acknowledge the senator's question and agree with you because it is a really messy, incredibly messy process that we're and I think more than one thing has to happen at the same time as a result. We've yet to see an executive mandate on equity from the governor. Doesn't exist. Now you could see that with the, not to be political, but we are in the State House, the Biden administration and the chief executive, the president of the United States has an executive order that has an equity mandate. Now that executive order was modeled to create the index for the economic distribution of the ARPA funds.
Right.
Though race wasn't considered, it was tailored rurally. I think it's gaslight, but that's something else. The point I'm making is that it's really messy work. The Office of Health, the Office of Racial Equity is involved in the work. I'm the chair of the Health Equity Advisory Commission. There's a lot of intersections.
Yeah.
We are putting forward a constitutional amendment for equal protection in the state. At the same time, all of this work is going on. There's an economic justice policy. H 448 is in the House right now. Never crossed over. Got the report in late. The chairs of the respective committees will be meeting. We'll be talking about when we have a similar conversation because they created this. We need money. Money's not there. So we got to figure that out. Health equity means all social determinants of health: housing, education, employment, economic development, transportation, the so-called criminal justice system, all of that stuff. So there's a lot of intersections. Super messy. One thing is for sure is that we wouldn't be doing this if the system was working, because it has not been working. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how do we collectively come together and implement strategies to augment the existing system, to buttress what exists, to tweak it in a manner in which systemically it will produce different outcomes and move forward. But I agree 100% with you, Senator, and I think there's just a lot of things that happen at the same time.
Works
Right.
for some now, it doesn't work for all.
And yeah, exactly. I think that's fair. So thank you very much. This is really helpful. And we will, the Appropriations Committee turns to us to sort of green light the things that fall in under our bucket of policy. So we will be obviously speaking with the chair of appropriations once the budget comes over. But thank you for your work. This is great. And we're very grateful.
Thank you
And
for support.
Thank you very much.
yeah,
Thank you.
it's good to see you. Haven't seen you in ages.
You were on one of our meetings.
This is already 10 years old.
That we knew, I was trying to figure out what
I'm happy to see you still living some.
time.
I remember your tradition.
So nervous.
So I'm a constituent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I moved, I went over the hill.
Yeah.
It's been a long journey.
Looking
And
at
hopefully.
projects.
Actually, I would say.
I'm in Canada.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't just, it wasn't just that. You know, my dad was a union organizer.
Well, every year,
But
but.
out of 24, actually.
Yeah, not all.
I'm glad you're still here.
That's a capital question.
Yeah.
I'm still doing finance.
Yes.
Thank you, this was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Are you?
Thank you. Just visit other people, jail monopoly.
Yeah.
Just visit.
It's always
Likewise. How's your son doing?
I'm really
I don't know.
interested in
You tell me.
practicality.
I don't experience them in the legal context. I mean,
I'm good. Pretty good.
we're we're hoping he's doing it. In fact, we hope he's doing a great job.
We hope so.
But to actually translate it is.
He's,
What's that?
his values are all in the right place.
And then.
The system has a challenge. I agree.
Including what passed yesterday.
What?
Including what was passed yesterday. 14.
Oh,
Here we go again. Back to this. Anyway,
goodbye. Good to see you.
send her out follow-up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Nice
good
to meet you too.
You're going to get a note. Finance needs to meet at 12:30.
Hi, come on in.
They would like, the pro tem would like to give the body guidance on the Grand Isle amendment.
Well, I've got an IBM guy coming to see me somewhere between 11:30 and 12, which is postponed from yesterday.
Okay,
And then I've got the governor's office and folks wanting to meet with me also, in fact, right now.
well, I will see what I
Just not
can.
enough hours
I
a
know.
day on these.
I thought I had a
unscheduled
free lunchtime because money.
I was gonna say,
canceled,
welcome,
but.
everybody.
He,
Somebody's gonna get disappointed.
yeah, the pro tem thinks that we need to give the body guidance since it's our bill and not just say we're neutral on her amendment.
I just do whatever you want to do.
I know, but I,
We're live.
Miles has been there. So
We're
anyway,
live.
I'll tell you the results of the vote.
No, I mean, I'll try to come if I can,
Okay,
but as
no, I
a
know.
practical matter.
We're having scheduling challenges, as you might gather. However, we're on time. We're in pretty good shape with you. We're only 5 minutes behind schedule. So Jessica, why don't you give us a start? We're shifting gears now to Vermont Working Communities Challenge. And it is good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Our chair is indisposed at the moment. She may be joining us soon via Zoom. So
Okay, great.
anyway, it's great to have you. And if you'd be kind enough to tee us up
Sure,
and
yeah.
introduce us to what we are discussing
Sure.
with your.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Jessica Savage. I work for the Vermont Council on Rural Development, and I'm joining the Zoom so that I can share a presentation. So just 1 second.
Right. And is that what we have in front of us?
Yes, that's the presentation. Yeah, yep, great.
There.
It was
I
cool that it
even-
wasn't,
And I even had like prepped, because last time I did this, I did the same thing and I had.
No
worries.
Yeah, but here we go.
You just gotta get that.
Great. So should I mute? Yes, I should mute myself.
Yes, I think that's the key to this no feedback.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for having us here today. As I said, I'm Jessica Savage with the Vermont Council on Rural Development. And we're here to talk to you about the Vermont Working Communities Challenge, to give you a bit of an update, to tell you about the initiative if you are not familiar with it.
Remind us, because I'm not sure you've been in this committee yet this year.
Yes.
So we should introduce ourselves. As you know, our chair is Keisha Ram Hinsdale. I'm
Yes.
Allison Clarkson, vice chair. I represent the Windsor County District.
And Cummings, Washington District, right here.
Wendy Harrison Wyndham, and I've actually met you. I was with Winooski
Yes.
and we spoke.
Yes. Yep. I don't think we met in person. Though.
No, we
Nice to
haven't.
see you. Yeah.
And I'm Randy Brock from Franklin County and part of Grand Isle.
Great. Nice to meet you all.
And Jessica,
Yes.
remind us what you do. I mean, Vermont Council on Rural Development has grown so much since we all know it as Paul Costello. And
Yes.
so what area do you work with for VCRD?
So I'm the director of community collaboration, and I started with them about 1.5 years ago after working for about 15 years with the state of Vermont. And my job with them is essentially communities that want to collaborate. And that's exactly what we're here to talk to you about is, some of the work that VCRD does. We're an independent nonprofit. We provide technical assistance and facilitation services for all the scales of conversation. So whether that's at a community level, people want to get together and talk about what actions they want to take at a community scale, policy councils, things like that. That's kind of our bread and butter. And with the Working Communities Challenge, my job is to provide coaching, technical assistance, and to kind of be that on-call convener and facilitator when and if they need.
And if you'd be kind of just to remind us what that challenge is and how many communities are participating, because I think I represent 2, but I'm not sure everybody's as aware of what's going on.
Sure, well, that's in my presentation, so I will
Right,
definitely, I want to give you all the details. And that's really what we're here to do today, is like, make sure that everybody kind of knows about this big initiative that's happening here. You're gonna get to hear from 2 of the initiative directors from 2 of the teams, Eli Tui and Sarah Danley, and then you'll hear from our executive director, making sure that we kind of tie it all together. But there are 8 teams around the state, and I can talk more about them soon. I just did want to say that we're here to just talk. We're not here to we don't have a specific ask, other than we think there's a really interesting partnership with the legislature that we're seeing is already happening, but I think there's a lot of potential because this initiative is all about systems change. It's about changing the conditions, keeping problems in place, not the one-off programs or projects or capital investments. Not that those things aren't happening, but this is really about the big picture. So your partnership has been essential. And I want to thank this committee and others that made it possible for us to have the funding for this work. The state has invested heavily in the teams. And most importantly, that investment allowed us to go from 4 teams to 8.
Right.
So really doubled the reach of this program. So I just want to express gratitude for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember when we did that.
That
2020.
yeah.
Do you remember when we did that?
That was, well, it was since 2020, but 2021, I want to say.
Yeah, in the last 3 years.
Yeah, not last
Vague
session, but the
period.
session before was when that appropriation found its way to the teams.
That's great, because I was involved in the application process, and then there were a couple of places who didn't get it, but then suddenly had one, so.
Yeah,
Thank
because
you.
we doubled it. The 4 initial ones were Springfield.
The 4 initial ones were Lamoille County, Springfield area, yes, you're right, Winooski, and Eli's Greater Barrie. So,
And then the 4 new ones are.
and the 4 new ones are Sarah's team, White River Valley,
Bradford.
Southern Vermont,
Whenever
all of
you
Southern
call it,
Vermont, and the Northwest region, Franklin and Grand Isle County, so Senator Brock, and then the Northeast Kingdom as well. So maybe this is making me think I should show you these slides. So you
Go
can
for
kind
it.
of have a visual to go along with what I'm saying. But
It is yours.
so I do just want to say that, why VCRD, sorry, I have the wrong thing open because my presentation wasn't online. Hold on.
And we do have these, if
You do.
this
We
is
have
it,
them.
we have it.
It is, but I should have it open for myself so I can share it with the people.
Well, we get to see you twice.
Right. No. Is this it? I think this is it. Excuse me.
Well,
But I just wanted to say that, VCRD would facilitate community conversations at all different scales. And we see time and again that Vermonters are willing to show up for these conversations and to take action. And we also see that there are some actions that really best happen at a larger than just a single town scale, right? So, and especially when you think of the work that the Working Communities is trying to do, which is removing barriers to employment with a focus on low-income Vermonters especially. That's childcare, that's transportation, that's workforce development, job quality. Those are big interconnected challenges in Vermont when you think of even just the geography of those services is interconnected. And so we see at VCRD that sometimes those conversations are best had at a regional scale. And with the Working Communities Challenge, these issues are being addressed in that way at a multi-community scale. And that scale is chosen by the communities, which is really interesting. It's not prescribed. Nobody told them you have to work at a county scale, you have to work at a prescribed, yes, I think I made it work. A prescribed scale, we let them choose at the scale that works best for the challenge that they have and the goal that they're setting, right? And these are big audacious goals, really trying to solve long-standing economic problems by changing the conditions, keeping those problems in place, right? So as a reminder, the Working Communities Challenge is a partnership between the state of Vermont, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, which does not provide funding, but provides sort of the programmatic and initiative structure for the work, the private sector, philanthropy, and communities themselves. It's a 3-year funding competition to strengthen Vermont's rural towns, regions, and small cities. And the goal is to support ambitious collaborative efforts that build strong economies and healthy communities with a focus on residents who have lower incomes. So here's a timeline of where we're at. We kind of talked about that a little bit already, but in about 2018, 19, the Fed started coming around and talking to different people. And Steve Michaud knocked on your door and said, hey, are you interested in this? That's kind of what they do. They come to the states to see, are you interested in these kind of programs that we've seen through research really create better economic outcomes, equitable economic outcomes for people. And the state said, yeah, we're really interested. And we really want to adapt it to a rural state. And so Vermont was the first state for this program to come. They have a Working Cities Challenge in Southern New England, but Vermont was really the first state to adapt it to a rural scale. And they did that through a number of different conversations with the steering committee, with stakeholders, with the state, the ACCD especially really involved. There was a design phase that lasted about 6 months. So teams were actually brought together. And it sounds like Senator Harrison, maybe you were involved with one of those application processes.
A little bit of the information, more with the implementation.
The implementation application. So teams were actually given money for their time so that they could come together and figure out who needs to be involved, what's our goal, what's the scale we want to work at, and really hone in on what they wanted to do for community-driven economic development in their area. And then they were invited to apply. We had 8 applications presented to the steering committee. And initially, as I said, 4 teams were selected. And the state said, these are all really great applications and teams. We want to get more funding there so we can fund all of them. And so that's what's happened. And that star kind of represents an average of where the teams are. But some teams, like Sarah's team's about a year plus in, Eli's team 2, closer to 3 years in. So there are teams in kind of a variety of that implementation phase. And now what we're really also talking about is that sustaining change phase, because we're talking about long-term systems change, and we have to think about how to make that stick, right? How we really keep that investment going. I mentioned that steering committee, really this effort is, informed by the work of the Federal Reserve Bank, but it is shaped and directed by our steering committee. And the people on the steering committee are really dedicated to this and wonderful people who I'm sure you've heard testify about their own individual organizations this year. Ted Brady, I'm sure, has come and talked about things, but they really see a very worthy endeavor here to invest time and energy in at a large scale. And they're wonderful. They're very active and involved. We have a policy work group. We have people who are really dedicated to thinking about the long-term sustainability of this work. And I just wanted to note that they're very active.
Do they actually meet on a regular basis?
Yep.
This is because this is a powerhouse. This is a brain trust.
It's a brain trust. Yeah, they meet on a quarterly basis. And some of the smaller groups, I get to work with the policy work group, which is Emma Marvin, Molly Lambert, Sarah Waring, and Ted Brady, and 2 members of our teams, Emily Rosenbaum and Alex Beck. They come together even more frequently when things need to happen. And so these people are really dedicated to keeping this cause going and sustaining it. You can see the funding partners there. There's, again, a mix of state funding, private philanthropy, both in-state and national philanthropy has been interested in this, which, rural investments from national philanthropy is kind of rare. So to have them really show up and want to invest in this work in a state like Vermont is kind of incredible. And we have had total commitments over $4.1 million since the beginning. So our 8 teams are here. I'm not going to read every single goal because I've already taken probably more time than I should, but you can see the scale of this is huge. This is 62% of Vermont's towns, 51% of Vermont's population approximately is involved.
What percent of the population?
About 51%. To check my math, but that's the statistic I always say. But and you can see the shaded the shaded areas on the map. It's covering a huge amount of our communities and lots of your districts too. So I hope that you learn more about what those teams are up to. If you don't learn more today from Sarah and Eli, but I'll just note that it's an incredible group of people making this happen. These are leaders, and they were already working together to some degree. Like, it's not like Working Communities Challenge showed up and it's a brand new thing. No, these are organizations who have been collaborating, but they're doing it now in a different way. They're doing it with the human capital necessary to make that happen, represented physically here today by Eli and Sarah, having these conveners who can bring together these cross-sector leadership teams, as well as resources to experiment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But these teams have really shown up. And when I say teams, they're like a variety of scales, but they're big groups of people. These are, 20 plus, 30 plus groups of numbers of people who have come together to try to work on these systems change goals together. The initiative directors, which Eli and Sarah, that's what we call those positions, are housed in a backbone organization, which is a term taken from collective impact models. Those backbone organizations are really also seen as trusted conveners in this process. They have an interest in the work, but they're not owning or competing for resources. They have a very high level of trust in order to make this happen. And they were selected by their communities. And I say this because it's kind of interesting to think about the variety of backbone organizations out there. We have regional planning commissions, regional development corporations, United Ways, other nonprofits that are in the same kind of space in that way. And so there's a lot of different types of stakeholders out there involved with this. So keys to success. What makes this different? Why is, this is a big investment. It's understandable that we should try to learn something from this. What really makes this work? So there's 2 big buckets that I think of when I think of the Working Communities Challenge. One is civic leadership, and that encompasses a whole bunch of things. And we'll talk about those in a second. And the sustained focus on economic development goals, systems change economic development goals, not just projects and programs, but changing big things. So those systems change solutions are developed in partnership with people with lived experience, experts by experience. Those solutions are created with a learning agenda. So we encourage and give lots of patient and flexible capital so that teams can experiment. Again, they're given this human capital investment, but they're also given access to action and innovation funds, technical assistance funds, all the resources that VCRD can bring, the Federal Reserve Bank, and creating sort of this wraparound set of a safety net, if you will, for experimentation, because you can't change a system unless you come up with hypotheses and test them out. So it's all about piloting things that we think will really change the conditions in a region, right? These collaborative teams are provided, again, with those necessary resources to work across sectors. So it's public, private, nonprofit. The teams are always growing, shifting, and changing. New members come in all the time as goals and strategies shift and change, as well as they shift. They work across boundaries. They connect within a region, across regions, within towns, across towns. And again, that whole big effort you could think of as community-driven economic development. And this is all based in foundational research that the Fed has done about what makes a difference for resurgent economies in New England, especially. So this is another way to, it's like an input-output model, kind of what I said, but I need to learn in a couple of different ways. So this is another way to look at it. So we put in, on one end, support and resources, this cross-sector partnership, their capacity and experience. And we've asked them to think about creating a shared goal of inclusive economic outcomes through community-driven economic development and systems change. And we've asked them to do it by thinking about learning and data, creating collaborative leadership, thinking about racial equity and community engagement, and system solutions. And on the other end, we get, at the local level, you get that team's work is impacting those local organizations, culture, and systems. The lasting legacy that I hope for the Working Communities Challenge is this team of leaders across sectors who trust one another, who've seen what happens when they see themselves in the work enough to come together. And that's as the goal shifts and changes, as it should, they can see that infrastructure of each other is the real investment that's been made. And the promising practices, the things that they learned, are shared across Vermont. And again, that's where we see a lot of partnership with the legislature needed. Is like we have to learn from this giant experiment that's happening in Vermont right now. And we hope that what's left behind, again, like I said, that local leadership in Vermont is more collaborative, inclusive, and focused on long-term economic well-being of communities. And economic development and community developed systems achieve better economic outcomes for their residents, especially those with low incomes, and are more resilient to our changing economy. So that's all the content I wanted to present. I'm happy to take any questions or.
Yeah, Andy.
We just finished a presentation before you arrived from a number of organizations around the state that are focused on a variety of issues involving marginalized communities,
Yes.
lower income people, people with disabilities, BIPOC, and so on.
Yeah.
Dealing with some of the same kinds of issues that you talked about here. As I look at the teams and goals, I see a couple that move into those areas, such as single female head of household issues,
Yeah.
poverty, and so on. But what I don't see is I don't see any representation of any of the people who've been here, who come here just 15 minutes ago,
Sure.
talking about the very same things for different populations in a different way.
Sure.
And this is, to me, one of the major problems that I criticize. I don't say criticize, that I raised with them as well, is people are talking about forming organizations that do coordination of issues,
Yeah.
that there are fundamental places of government that are supposed to be doing this, don't seem to be, and aren't talking with each other.
Sure.
Can I strongly suggest that you talk with the people who were here 15 minutes ago?
Yeah.
Because none of them are represented in any of the organizations that are behind this program. And I'm concerned about it. I'm concerned that everybody is going off in their own lane
Yeah, their own side.
without looking at who's beside them.
Sure.
So it's not a criticism. I think I said that you're doing great work. These are very positive things. But what the thing that concerns me the most is we do so many things in a very uncoordinated way in Vermont. And then we create organizations to do things that are very narrow in that way. And we miss the bigger picture of the process.
Sure. I hear you, and that is a legit concern. And I think we are connected to the Land Access and Opportunity Board. I was just chatting with Holly when Jess came out about how we need to have a conversation. It's all connected, right? And I think the difference with the Working Communities Challenge is we're not creating a new organization.
Mhm.
We're giving capacity to communities to do that coordinating work. And as the work of an entity like the Land Access and Opportunity Board unfurls, it will end up at that scale where there is a lot of collaboration happening. And I see it very much connected. I see the work, really, I could think of the Working Communities Challenge, and I say this sometimes, as economic justice.
Mhm.
And so it is absolutely connected to other land justice, environmental justice efforts happening in Vermont. And I think there's a lot of energy in this space right now, and there's conversations happening about how do we all connect and coordinate at the right scale, right? And so yes, I hear you. And I think about that a lot because Vermont's too small for us not to be collaborating and coordinating.
Well,
And
that's
frank-
one of the things is I've always
Yeah.
thought that in politics, if there were anything that I could ever do, is I would take every job that has the word coordinator in it in state government and eliminate it. Because whatever you have coordinators suggests you have a system that's not coordinated,
Hmm.
which is why.
But actually, what you're asking for is coordination. with
Yeah.
them.
I'm
So I
asking
mean, in
people
all
to
fairness,
talk with each
you
other
are
to
asking
get
for
to.
coordination.
That's exactly right. And I'm not saying that what any organization is doing is absolutely the right thing to do and so on. But it just, so many things seem to be done in a vacuum that it really concerns me.
Yes.
So I'd love to build on that and ask, do we have a set standard with all 8 teams that are the measures that we're looking at for success in 5 years? Because what I don't see, and I've just took a peek at Sarah's piece on the White River, which I've not been asked to participate in at all. And I'm the senator for many of these towns. And it's a little frustrating to me as the vice chair and majority leader in the Senate, and the vice chair of this committee, that I haven't been asked to engage in this. So I just give you that piece of feedback as a coordinator with the legislature. Engage your legislators because we actually would love to be involved. So I'd like to know what the measures are for success. I don't know what our time frame is. Is it 5 years, 6 years for the working one?
The implementation grants are 3 years.
So we're now into the second phase of the 3 years, or beginning the second phase of the 3 years.
Yeah.
So I want to know what the measures are that we are going to be able to say in 3 years from now, it's 2026, we were successful.
Sure.
Because I see, in family income in Sarah's report, I see some measures that you've identified that you'd want to. So
Right.
what are the measures that you're kind of looking at that you want to make improvement in?
Right. And so I'll just say that we've had this conversation very extensively recently about what is the right level of metrics, like what is the right level of standardization across all of the teams to be asking them to pay attention to. We are working with the teams to be that flexible support that they need. Really, the teams set these systems change goals, they create strategies, and they measure all kinds of results here.
But so we don't have so each team has its own set of measures that they will then determine success with.
Yes, and we're having a conversation right now about how best to adapt as a more standardized approach while keeping that flexibility in place. So we're talking about things like how can we make sure that each team has a measure for civic leadership, right? That systems change piece that is about building new partnerships. Like, is there a way we can ask each team to show us that through this work, if not for WCC, these partnerships, this trust and collaboration wouldn't have happened. Right?
Yeah, I think that's showing value for your engagement.
Yes.
Is I think what we
Yes.
all want to see.
Another measure that we're talking about is stacked capital, like what investments have been made that if not for WCC wouldn't have happened. For instance, I was just with the Southern Vermont team last week, and they were able to share that they have brought in about $550,000 additional dollars that wouldn't have come if not for their work, right? So at the same time as trying to be as we don't want people to measure for measurement's sake, I guess. And so we're in that conversation right now where we've asked teams to think about measures and how to share them, but we're hyper aware. I think VCRD, we're just like really our job is just to be their biggest fan and to get that sustained support for this effort, so that it isn't a flash in the pan, that this is like something that sticks because systems change takes more than 3 years. So we really want to make sure that we're guiding a conversation around measures in that way, that it's not just measuring for measurement's sake, but to show that impact and really with the goal of like measuring that actually does something towards the systems change. Another example would be in Southern Vermont, I think of the ethnographic interview project that they're doing. They want to learn from people with immigration status about how they got here, what their experience was like, and what made them stay or not in Vermont. Because if we don't do that kind of measuring, we're not going to have the right approaches to welcome and retain new residents, so.
So I know we have about 15 more minutes together, and I know that Sarah and
Yes.
Eli.
Yes.
So, and are you also testifying?
I'm Eli.
Oh, you're Eli.
Yeah.
Hello, Eli. So you're Elaine.
Yes.
Eli is short for, okay, got it. And Brian.
Yes.
Great, terrific.
Senator, can I add one comment to the?
Okay, great. So we have 25 more minutes and we're going to adjourn at 11.
Okay.
So, great. Who would, Ms. Jessica, would you like to pass the baton on and hear from our other
I feel
fabulous?
complete. I would pass the baton to Eli Tui from the Greater Barrie team.
Great.
Well, Brian wanted to say.
Brian was about to jump in, I think.
Well, because I can either jump in now or hold my comments to the end. I just wanted to add to the measurement response. So
Great, go for it. It's good to see you just identify yourself because it's great to have you.
Brian Lowe, the executive director from the Vermont Council on Rural Development. Just to add on the measurement piece, I think a couple levels these measurements are taking place at. There are the kind of individual team levels, 8 different teams that have specific different goals that are variable across the state. There is though a kind of higher level of different measurements that Jess is alluding to, and those are based on Federal Reserve research about what's most impactful and an external program evaluator, Mount Auburn Associates, that is helping them track and measure certain
great
activities across all 18.
Was that provided, paying for Mount Auburn? Is that what Federal Reserve is doing?
Federal Reserve is pooling all this national funding.
Yeah, that's where they're very helpful.
Bring that in. So I think one way to think about that kind of broader level of measurements is thinking across, as Jess said, kind of federal funding and huge drawdown or but for WCC, when you see kind of stacked capital or federal funds drawn down. Another angle is thinking about kind of capacity measures. A lot of what we're doing here is not creating new organizations, but adding capacity to existing organizations. And a third and final is some of these systems change measures that Jess alluded to. And I just reinforcing what she's saying, but using a different schema of those different levels of measurement.
So can I just, when I thought that the Federal Reserve was paying for some of this initiative when I heard about it. So are they funneling the funding from like the state of Vermont and all these other private agencies to the Federal Reserve? So the Federal Reserve actually writes the checks?
The Federal Reserve can't directly fund the work, they're pooling the kind of national plan fee that they receive to support this work.
And
So does Vermont send a check to the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve writes the check to pay expenses?
I actually think the state and Federal Reserve funds might not be commingled. I think that might have been part of the, Jess, am I wrong about that?
Yes, I don't know what the mechanism is, but that's an interesting, we need to pay attention to what they did because they pooled funding that has a lot of restrictions on it in a way that removed all of the bureaucratic red tape for the teams. So
Wow,
they could
that's
speak
big.
to how that is received on their end, but
an experience, yeah.
yeah, so the Federal Reserve, they have they themselves can't actually grant or pay funds. They have this third party. I don't know what the institute, I'm speaking out of my lane here a little bit, but you can answer some of it.
Right.
Federal Reserve uses an intermediary called Blue Water, which is the kind of holding company where those funds sit. I believe the state funds are not commingled. There's a separate pot of state funds. And the Federal Reserve is the one ultimately receiving, but then transferring out those funds. We track time, we do it through multiple accounts. But just the point, what this is doing is it allows the teams to be funded in a much more flexible way, responsive to their needs.
Great,
All right, that's good to know.
yeah, terrific. So who would you like to pass the baton to?
To Eli.
Okay, great.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna leave.
And I did send just a couple pages. I don't know if those are received.
You have this.
Ask
No, that's
Scott.
fine. Oh, okay.
Okay.
I don't,
Perhaps they weren't received.
well, Scott can put them up on the,
Okay, I sent them when we were gonna testify the prior date. That's okay.
So I don't have one on the website yet, but I'll go back and find the email.
Do you want me to resend
And then we
it?
can-
If you have it handy right quick, then
Yeah, I can resend it.
my apologies for that, I didn't think about it.
I will introduce myself as I'm doing this. We'll see if I can do two.
In your greater Barry area.
So I am Eli Tui. I'm the initiative director for the Greater Barry Area Working Communities Challenge. And I cannot do two things at once. Jessica,
Yeah,
I
no
know
worries,
you.
we're
Would you
fine.
mind
Sure.
sending me this
Yeah.
stuff? I just sent it to you. Yeah. Okay. So, so our team is made up of it's a large collaboration, employers, social service agencies, economic development folks, and then our backbone organization is the Green Mountain United Way. So I work directly out of Green Mountain United Way. And we have a leadership team there that we meet often. And then we meet monthly for our larger core team. And pretty early on, we determined that before I came on actually, it was determined that the single head of household in the Greater Barry area was the demographic we wanted to focus on because of the disproportionate level of economic instability among women in Barry. That's gotten worse over the course of COVID, pretty substantially worse. So early on, the focus was transportation, food insecurity, and childcare. So those were the three areas that we were really looking at. That quickly morphed when I came on. We did some strategic planning with the entire team, and it quickly morphed into really focusing on the benefits splits, which we're actually calling the benefits canyons now, because we're looking at how, as people progress through their career, they hit these cliffs that then, maybe pull them out of the workforce or make it very difficult to advance in the workforce. So we work with Green Mountain United Way, their program, the Working Bridges program, which is a well-established, very well-defined. We have a large network of employers. We just brought on Blue Cross Blue Shield and Tough and Vermont Mutual. So we have, I think it's up to 26 employers now. Some of those very large employers are on our team. So CVMC is on our team, Home Health and Hospice, and the Food Bank are on our core team. And so,
Oh, look, Scott is pulling this.
oh, you set it up. Okay, so this is just a reiteration of what Jessica shared about the conditions that are kind of present in the Working Communities Challenge opportunities for us to advance the work that we're doing.
And here you are.
And here we are. So our goal is this increasing economic mobility and overall well-being for Greater Barry Area head of household women experiencing financial instability, specifically through career workforce alignment. And as far as the measure, our specific measure is
So can I just ask, what does that mean between
Yeah.
career and workforce alignment?
yeah. So
I mean,
it's
what does that?
so it's aligning all of the work, all of the supports that are needed for somebody to
Okay,
be a
so-
successful worker.
Got it. So that if you are working with an individual person,
Yeah.
you are able to share with them all these other, now how, so that we look at non-duplicative work,
Yeah.
how is that not different than what they would experience with the person they're working with in economic services, or with the person they might be working with in the Department of Labor,
Yeah.
or with the person they might be working with in adult education?
Yeah. So adult ed is on our core team. So they
Right.
are a part
That's
of, yeah.
It's up there.
Yeah, they're up there. Yeah, Vermont, they are in Central Vermont. Adult ed is on our team. I think the difference is that this is a much more holistic. We are talking directly with the cohort of women that we're working with. A lot of those systems include barriers that are the barriers that we're actually looking to address to receive those resources. We're working right now on a training called the Resource Worker. So it's looking at how do we include people who have been through these systems in the decisions that are being made about what those systems look like. And that training is for employers specifically, to try to have employers see through the lens of what, resources and scarcity looks like for their workers. And our employers are, and not just our employers, everybody I talk to about this is ready for that training, very ready.
And you provide that training?
And we are developing it.
That's great.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Wendy.
If you're okay with just
Yeah.
random questions,
Yeah.
so you mentioned transportation as one of your initial focus. I'm very interested in public transportation because I see it as a nexus for housing, health, safety, work. Do you have any advice or?
So we're working closely with, she's actually my neighbor, because this is Vermont, with Amanda Carlson for Capstone, and they have set up their nonprofit looking at the ride hailing service for people that we have been a part of those conversations and have brought kind of the nuances of what our participants, might need for a service like that. And I think that's an example of the overall WCC, that creative capital, that we are in those conversations with people in the direct area of Barrie, but we're also talking to NEK Prosper, and we're talking about what we're doing with our benefits clubs work there, and it's vice versa, we're learning from them. We have a strong partnership with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta with their tools for benefits clubs, because that is a focus for them, and we're using those tools as part of our training. And we're also using those tools to test how those can be used for specifically Vermont's benefits programs. You can type in, if somebody gets a pay raise, exactly what happens to their benefits. And you can see if they're going to hit that click or not. And then you can preemptively, as a collaborative, this just powerhouse of collaborators can come together and say, here's where we can fill in some gaps. Here's where we can lend our voice to policy changes that might change that and ameliorate the effects of that. So this is just an example. This is a real person in graphic form of
How, this is very interesting.
That's really
so
helpful.
this is a single head of household woman. She has worked at CVMC for 24 years. She is a single mom of 3 kids. She got 52-cent
CVMC.
Central Vermont Medical Center.
Okay.
Yeah, she works in environmental services. She got a 52-cent raise, and it put her $56 over the income limits, the gross income limits for annual limit. And because of that, she lost $13,000 of food benefits that were available to her. And so she actually.
Oh, thanks, Scott. That's great.
So this is, the top one is what happens when somebody loses those benefits without our program. And you can see the deficit, her pay increase was about $1,000. So her loss in net resources about 11,000. She has to make the choice. Does she leave the workforce? Does she go in and speak to her employer and negotiate, hey, I don't want this raise. This isn't helpful to me. Does she search, food banks? What does she do? We have resource coordinators who help with that. But then if you go down, Scott, if you wouldn't mind, this is what happens when we come together and we support programs that everyone needs. Farmers to You is a pilot that we have. And I shared with you what kind of the outcomes of some of that. We've done 3 pilots so far, 3 12-week pilots. It is where the organizations come together, CVMC, Green Mountain United Way, the Vermont Food Bank, and then Farmers to You offered a discount because they have a social mission towards helping low-income Vermonters. Came together and offered an 80% subsidized food box. So every week, women who are employees at CVMC, who make a certain income, can go in, order their food, and they get an 80% subsidized food box to offset their food costs. So that's what's an example of an initiative that came out of this collaboration and people being able to come around to the table.
That's really interesting. Now, does the hospital know that this is happening?
Yes,
Do
the hospital
they-
is on our team. So
Because they should maybe help out a little bit.
well, so our next pilot, they're putting in $140,000
Okay.
for a pilot that will be specifically for women who make $20 or less. It's going to be about 100 women, and it'll be a more longitudinal project. So it's going to look at a year. What happens when you offer? It's a little bit of a smaller subsidy. It's a 65% subsidized box. What happens when you offer that over a year to somebody's economic stability?
So what about men? There's got to be some men
Yep.
in environmental services.
Yep, and I'll say that the beauty of our program, that from my perspective, is that the Working Communities Challenge aspect of it is that we have focused on single head of household women because of the disproportionate economic instability. However, because we are expanding the Working Bridges model, we don't have to tell anybody that we're working with, sorry, you're out of luck, we can't help you. they still get the supports through the Working Bridges program, because the Working Bridges program is for anyone who works at that. They won't get the subsidized box, because that's a little more focused on
women.
women.
But
Yeah.
you've got a male head of household working for $18 an hour.
Yeah.
He's not losing his food stamps,
No, he could lose his food stamps. We just,
depending on the number of kids.
yeah, for this project, the focus was on women because it was so disproportionately affecting
Right,
women, yeah.
that's,
So, but it could, and is absolutely informing what, one of our employers that we work with, not in the Greater Bay Area, but in the Northeast Kingdom, Weidman is a big manufacturer.
Yeah.
And our
Same
team
thing.
includes the resource coordinator for Weidman. So she knows all of these projects that we're doing. And we can go and talk to Weidman, their leadership, and say, hey, we've done this at CVMC. We may not even have to do that. We could say, hey, CVMC, can you talk to Weidman leadership about what you've done to support your workforce?
So I guess my problem is we're still feeding a part of the problem here, which is people aren't earning enough. So I would rather have hospital pay $140,000 instead of helping support a problem that is created by people not earning enough to have a livable wage,
I think
so
the
they can
issue,
stand on their own 2 feet.
but that's a major driver of our health insurance
well, and
costs.
the
so-
issue with that is
I mean,
that it's $37 an hour. In order for a single woman who has
Yeah.
2 children to make a livable wage, the hospital would have to change their wage force so that just single women made $37 an hour, which isn't.
I have a problem with and I understand, I was on the board of Capstone before it was Capstone for 12 years. I've worked in Project Independence, I've been there. But if we target women, and I understand, I've got this woman living up at the hilltop, I'm gonna send to you, with 2 kids. But if we target women and it starts looking like men with hungry children are up the creek, we're gonna get pushback. Hungry children are hungry children. And I think Randy's not here, but that's when you start setting up a target group for a good reason, but you leave somebody else's children going hungry.
And I think this is,
You're gonna have
it's the target for the purpose of the pilot. These tools can
Right.
be used for anyone. Our resource coordinator can sit down with a gentleman from, Weidman or.
No, what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
if I'm working on the janitorial staff,
Yeah.
environmental services, and the 3 women that mop floors with me go and get a food box on Friday, I'm mopping the same floors for the same wage. I've got just as many hungry kids, and I can't get that food box. I'm gonna feel angry.
Yeah.
And my kids are still gonna be hungry, and that, I don't wanna see what is a good thing stop because our pilot
Yeah,
says.
I
your
hear
kids
you,
are good.
I hear you, and the reality of the situation is that single head of household, the majority is women, most.
Yes, I know that.
And that those men are still being supported through our resource coordination, so they can still get food boxes
Who's
through
our?
Capstone, so this is Green Mountain United Way. which is
Okay,
our
so
backbone
Green
organization.
Mountain, and the Lamoille County, since I now have Stowe,
Yeah,
has talked to me extensively about the Bridges program.
yeah,
But going through the Bridges program, will that male head of household with a couple kids have access to the same food that the woman in the same position?
ultimately, I would hope so, for the pilot.
But the
no.
short answer is no.
Not for the pilot, no.
Yeah.
Because our focus is on single head of household.
Right, and we have sadly now 8 minutes
Okay.
before we have to finish, but we can go a little bit later. Because we'd love to hear from, Brian. and Sarah.
Yeah, I will pass it to Sarah.
But no, you finished, so
Okay.
we need to get you to finish.
Okay, that's what I have.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and we
That's
do
great.
have a lot of, one thing that I do want to plug though is that this is a learning community, that our collaborative is doing these real initiatives and doing real work, but it's also a learning community where we are learning from, Northeast Kingdom, the United Way of Northwest, and vice versa. What the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta is wanting from us is to really know what's happening with rural communities. They have a lot of partners that are more urban and suburban, where they've piloted these benefits plus tools with a lot of efficacy. They want to know what that looks like in a rural community. So part of that longitudinal project that we're moving into is also going to be feeding information back to them about this is what's happening in our rural communities. This is what this tool needs to have tweaked to really support what's happening at those, rural communities. So
That's great. So the longitudinal study or work that's being done is being done by the Federal Reserve. So I take it's for a longer period of time than the next 3 years?
No,
Or is it
this, I'm talking about that 1-year project.
Oh,
for the-
okay.
This Farmers to You pilot, that we'll be doing for a year. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston is learning from that, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta is learning from that, and vice versa.
Great, thank you for your work. This is exciting.
Yeah.
If also frustrating, because I think all of us in this committee want people to be earning enough to stand on their own 2 feet without assistance. And if we, the state is, anyway. But it's
And I
an
would say
ongoing
that the
problem.
pushback from the employers, because we have employers on our team, when I first brought the benefits splits, the realities of the benefits splits to that team, there was a lot of defensiveness in the room, and I understand why, because they can't raise their wage floors to, where somebody is making $37 or where, a single woman is making $37 an hour for, a comparable making $23 an hour, which is what a two earner household needs. And so, it's not just on the employers, it really has to come together where everybody is.
It's largely on the employers. The state is hemorrhaging on assistance. So I mean, and I'm a strong progressive Democrat, and yet we have strong support systems. And I think, we underpay generally across the state 20%. So it isn't, we're not doing that. That is generally an employer challenge, is to bring up wages and to see, and our hope always is to provide workforce upskilling and training. And I mean, we're committed to trying to get people fabulous jobs they love, where they earn enough to live and support their families.
Yeah.
And it is really frustrating to see how many of our employed people are still not earning enough, so that they're still dependent on our state benefits, and that employers are dependent on our state benefits to make their families healthy and whole.
Yeah.
And that is what is so frustrating.
It is frustrating.
I just have to, I think we all feel that pretty strongly in this committee.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for your work on this. This is
Absolutely.
really great and
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
Who do you want to pass the baton to?
I'll pass it to Sarah.
Okay.
And I actually need to step up because I need to get on there. So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see you, Ela.
You as well, thank you.
And are we okay to go because I want to also get to Brian, are we okay to go until like 11:10? Because then you and I need to turn to our.
Okay, I don't know, but Senator Chittenden did send an email to Keisha and Chris Gray asking to come in with his tomorrow morning.
Yes, we're passing over 102.
Okay.
100 today.
It's gonna be, all right, I gotta redo my committee
I'm sorry, I
agenda.
thought we talked about that, but before when I said we were going to pass over 102.
I got called out, so I may not. have been
Yeah,
in here.
sorry.
All right.
We're passing over 102 and 100 today because of Keisha being out.
Okay. Well, Keisha's
And 30, but I
out,
don't think
she's not.
Oh, no, we're clear.
Yeah.
That's why we need to meet at 11:10. So if we can go to 11:10, that would be great.
And we're probably passing over 32, which I can talk to you about.
Yes, because I wasn't clear on that. And then Ashley has just, sorry,
Well, we can talk about that
Yeah.
in 10 minutes.
we are going to chat.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great.
It's fine.
Sorry, Sarah. Go on.
Thank you for being flexible. So for the record, my name is Sarah Danley. I'm the initiative director for the White River Valley Consortium. Unlike Eli, I'm not going to talk as much about the details of what we're working on. I'm more here to talk about how we're building relationships and coming together as a region, because this is one of the teams that, as you can see, is multiple towns.
Many.
Yes.
Smaller towns.
Smaller
which is
towns.
Different than Greater Barry.
Exactly.
You got
So
some big towns there, Bethel.
yeah, big by our standards.
I was gonna say, since when does Barry get to be rural? In Vermont, it's a good size city.
So, and I do have a few stats, as you've probably seen. I've been looking ahead in the
We are
slides,
not the
so-
rest of the world,
Right.
so.
So our consortium is fairly loosely defined, but you can see the approximate map on the left. The White River Valley, of course, is a watershed in terms of people's daily life. This really is a natural community in terms of commuting, grocery stores, restaurants.
You have one of mine.
Yeah, we have.
Braintree is
Yes.
in my district now.
Really?
Yes.
Yes.
We are at the intersection of a lot of different regions and districts and
Apparently,
four
the only
different
way you
counties,
can get
actually.
there from, I don't know, we have a road from Washington County.
So it's a fun region. I will also note that we do not include White River Junction, which some people assume because of the name. So
I
White
did.
River- Right, so
Yeah.
White River
Yeah.
Junction is working very closely, especially on housing issues with the other core towns of the Upper Valley. So Norwich, Hanover, and Lebanon. So they do a lot of work together. So we're sort of more focused upstream from them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different market too.
It says
Yes.
White River and it means White River.
Yes. So let's see
That
if
looks
it says it.
cute, but it doesn't show the mountains.
Right. So I won't read them out loud, but I did include our core teams on the left-hand side of the slide, but I'll skip over them for time reasons. But our
Which is great.
working communities challenge goal is to increase the availability of housing that's available for entry-level workforce and beginning entrepreneurs, develop a regional identity and model a new way of working together in order to create a White River Valley region where opportunity and sense of belonging are available for people of all incomes, races, ages, and backgrounds, and all community members are able to live their best lives. So that's from the application, and that's really the core of what we're trying to do over the course of the 3 years. So this is where I did want to take a little bit of time talking about the towns in the region, share a little bit of data. Again, I'm not going to go too much in the details of what we're working on, and of course you all are very familiar with housing in general, but I wanted to highlight a few things about a town specifically in our region. So down the left-hand side of the slide is the statistics for the 14 communities that make up the White River Valley Consortium. And then I want to call out a few things about specific towns as example. Randolph, of course, is the biggest town in our region and the biggest town in Orange County. So we're looking at 4,700 people in almost 2,000 households. In Randolph, an estimated 59% of renter households are cost burdened. So we're looking at percentages comparable to Chittenden County there. A bit of a bigger town by our region standards in that there is a town manager and also an economic development director. The economic development director does also serve as a planning administrator, so we're still not talking a huge municipal staff here. Royalton is also in the region, and Royalton's population is actually 44% renters, which is pretty high for the region and for a town this
That's
size.
just law school.
It is because it's a law school. Not all of the renters are law students. There is a population of people who stay afterwards, who are attracted to live there because of the law school, even if they're not attending themselves. Royalton's also looking at a projected increase of 312 households, according to the Keys to the Valley study, if any of you are familiar with that.
Yes, of course.
Yes. And Royalton does have a full-time town administrator, but it does not have a town manager. And there's also no zoning. So zoning is not the barrier in this particular community.
So under Act 250, you can't put up more than 6 houses in any one area without going for an Act 250 permit.
It would still be the 9. It's still the 9, I
It's
believe.
9.
Yeah.
But no zoning does get you into Act 250 at a lower threshold.
That much,
Yes.
yes, below 10.
Okay.
So, and then just the third example I wanted to include in this is Rochester. So looking at a little bit of a smaller community, even in Rochester, where we still have a significant number of cost burdened households and a projected increase in population. The median household income is only $63,000. The town has a 3-member select board and no town manager or town administrator. So this is the environment that we're working with in these municipalities who chose to come together to work on this challenge.
a little bit more effectively than trying to do it alone.
I think that is probably more Vermont.
Yes.
It's
common.
emblematic of many
Yeah,
things.
It is,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
It's a good example and it's great that you're looking at
Very,
this way.
very limited professional government.
Exactly.
You can call it, yeah.
So one of the things we have done, we're one of the expansion teams we just started a year ago. One of the things we did do in 2022 was collect a wide variety of input from the community. I'm happy to share more information with any of you who are interested. I won't read these quotes out loud for time reason, but I do want to include these 2 quotes because we've been making a special effort to connect with younger community members. You know, our grant goals around housing that's affordable for entry-level workforce and beginning entrepreneurs. So you can see these 2 quotes. One is someone under the age of 25, entry-level workforce. The one on the right is actually someone who is a beginning entrepreneur in their late 30s or early 40s about their experiences with housing and the impact that it has on the community and the region. So our team didn't want to jump into large projects too fast, of course, given the flexible funding and the exploratory nature of the program, and because we wanted to hear from the community first. But we have been engaging in some of other work in the past year, especially work that will help build those relationships and bring partners together across the region. So for example, we've been providing opportunities for folks across the region to learn and connect. Here on the left, you see we organized a field trip for people in the White River Valley, including select board members from multiple towns, to visit Jordan Richards' development site in Fairleigh together. So we had select board members actually hearing from the Fairleigh folks about their development, but connecting with each other across the White River Valley about how that might be applied to our region. On the right, you can see an event we did where we brought folks from ACCD, VHCD, and VHFA to do actually a couple of different stops across the region, but this photos from a walking tour in Rochester with members of the Housing Committee, the Planning Commission, and the Select Board. So really starting to build those relationships and connections. It's also a really important part of our work to assist the community leaders who are deep in the weeds in their own community and are already starting to do the work. So Rochester, I mentioned, Rochester is one of those examples of a town with small professional staff, but they do have a housing committee, which had been formed right at the start of the Working Communities Challenge program by a VCRD community visit. So we've been supporting their housing committee and figuring out what they want to do. So these photos are from an event we just hosted last month. It was a welcome to the community event. Also a nice example of the cross-town collaborations that are being built by this program, because they actually did this as an event for Rochester, Hancock, and Granville, and actually got a grant from VNRC that included funding for door-to-door direct mailing to all of the residents of all 3 of those towns to really build bridges and bring those communities together. It's also an example of connecting to other resources, to get back to the earlier conversation about not duplicating, not recreating the wheel. This bottom photo is actually of the CVOEO Fair Housing Month activity art kits, which we were able to connect this Rochester housing group with because they hadn't been familiar with that statewide program. And of course, we've been engaged in a lot of conversations about finding what the right solutions are to apply for our community and our nuances and the people in our region and what they want. So here on the left, you have a picture of our core team members doing a brainstorm and preliminary assessment of what solutions we should even be considering. And on the example is just this, on the right hand side is just a sample of the type of input we've been collecting from the community through surveys, focus groups, et cetera. We've really been trying to ask the community about what type of solutions they want, not just about what type of problems they see or challenges they're facing.
Great.
So what we have coming next, we are cleaning up the public input that we've been gathering and starting to create the public facing documentation of that. So that will be coming out soon. And we'll have more official synopses to share.
So you're doing that with all 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 towns?
So we did that as a region, not on a town by town basis. So we had a survey and focus groups, but they weren't town specific. They were about the region as a whole. So we'll be working.
And how many gathered at your regional meeting? I mean, how many are engaged in your regional meeting?
It wasn't a specific meeting. This has been a whole series of events across the year.
Right, but how many of this population, which you identify somewhere, how many have engaged in your survey?
The survey
of the 18,000 people you could.
The survey only had about 150 responses. It was a long survey, not a quick survey, so more written like an interview guide than a quick survey. And then we've done a number of focus groups as well. So we're working on summarizing that information. We are working on figuring out the details of a sort of flagship project, you could call it, on supporting the creation of ADUs specifically by low and moderate income homeowners who might really need the additional income to stay in their own home. And then we're working on additional ongoing work, especially around relationship building and information sharing. And then in the fall, we'll turn more towards deliberately defining and articulating what the White River Valley as a region is.
And you're mostly served by Twin. Who are you working with on the
Rediff-
ADUs? You're doing Windsor, Wyndham.
So
Housing
the White River Valley is served by 3 different.
Trust. Yes, you are. It's a challenge.
The ADU is actually, we're working mostly with the Randolph Area Community Development
Okay.
Corporation, which is on our core team, and they're taking the lead on this particular ADU project. Perfect. I would love to follow up with you about that project.
Great.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Given our time frame, I'm going to turn to Brian. Just, does anybody have a question for Sarah before we move on?
No, it looks wonderful.
It really is exciting. I'm thrilled you're doing
Great.
this.
Thank you.
All communities in need of this work. So it's great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. And this isn't your first time testifying with us today, this
It is my
year, is
first
it?
time
I think it is. I think it may be.
Yes.
Anyway, it's great to have you. We introduced ourselves before, and so it's good to see you.
Thank you very much for having us today. And mindful of the time, I'm going to kind of toss out my prepared remarks and just make 5 points. That
Would you
I
send us
kind of
your
pulled
remarks
together. Well,
digitally?
Prepared remarks. I can if you want. They're more notes to myself, but
Okay.
I'm going to make instead kind of 5 points that I think try and pull together some of what Jessica, Eli, and Sarah laid out in a coherent summation, ideally, right? There are 5 things to share. First, I would think of this effort as really a kind of convening effort, not a new organization, but an organization that is pulling different groups of people together in different regions, depending on what communities are identifying in those regions as their priorities. It is looking at different ways to fund this work. It is creating new networks, new relationships across those regions, and it is adding capacity to existing organizations to carry out work. It is not itself a new organization. It is, second point, really trying to respond to locally identified challenges. Those challenges are pooled at the regional level, right? These are 8 regional teams, but they are organically identified. And I think Eli's really specific example of the kind of benefits cliff piece is a group that is responding to a reality and a challenge. And the third point is there's funding here to allow that group to innovate, to think, to experiment, not to have to kind of respond to the immediate challenge every day, but to think a little bit strategically about what it is that they want to do and what they want to see. They are, as Eli was doing, kind of pulling together and identifying potential policy changes. And I think that's where,
and that is where we
us,
need to partner.
we want to come to you and begin that process, right? It's we're kind of one side of a bridge. I really think you guys are both the bridge and the other side of the bridge. And so our hope is to begin today a conversation to connect you and to learn from these different 8 teams, what is it that they're actually finding that could be valuable to you, depending on your priorities as a committee. The last and final thing is I really want to emphasize the point Jess made at the beginning. It's not just about the policy change, which I think is vitally important. It's also about these new networks, bringing people together in different ways and creating these new systems for how things can be accomplished. These communities, these towns, these regions, they're identifying these challenges because the system isn't working. So I think it needs to proceed on both those tracks, both the specific policy corrections, changes, adjustments, and those new systems in place. And I think I'll stop there unless you have questions. Mindful of your time and appreciative of you giving us extra time today as well.
Yeah, well, our life has been just a little bit upended, so it's great that you. Thank you very much. Anybody have questions for any of the 3 remaining? No, this is great. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that you articulate that well, all of you, which is, I mean, you're doing things and working on projects that we hope will bear fruit that you can then bring to us and that we can then work on and enable legislatively, you having done the incredible groundwork of piloting things and then proposing policy changes that will enable change that we hope will systemically improve lives. So,
and we may have useful data. You're the experts who know the right policy.
We're not the experts. You're the experts. You have time to be the experts. We don't have. We have. We're sensible and can enact change in our own ways. So, thank you. It's this is a terrific partnership, and I've gotten to know the Springfield work pretty well. But it's and so it's exciting, and we're This is terrific. Thank you very much. More to follow. Yeah,
sorry.
Wendy. go
Is there a website where all of this lands?
Yes, and there's.
On BCRD's website.
Yes, BCRD, we have a page. I did bring this, and Scott, I'll email this to you, but here's a card that has the keys to success, all 8 of the teams, and on the back is their website.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
And then each of our areas has a working communities challenge embedded in it. So I think we're all
Right.
actually pretty lucky here.
Right.
So I have 2, I've discovered. So this is great. Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I think we're going to adjourn for this morning, and we are, tomorrow morning, we will be hearing.
Now, you have the amendment to, that I'm offering regarding.
Right, and 102 and 100 are being punted till
All
tomorrow.
right, 102 is going for tomorrow.
Would you like to discuss that
No,
now?
that's just, so it's just, if it's going tomorrow, I can delay that if you guys.
Well,
have
why don't we do it
other things to
now?
do.
Let's take a few minutes to do it now. We're still live, right? So let's discuss it now. And I don't know if Keisha can be on with us to hear it,
I can,
or we can email it to her and,
Senator Rocket sent this to her last night.
oh, you sent it to her. Okay, great.
Yeah,
I don't know. Who knows if she said chance
Yeah.
to look at it.
Here's
And
a
what-
little light reading. I know how much free time you have.
Oh, here it is for Anne. Sorry, I keep thinking.
All right, so 102, so I need to have 102 up in front of me to understand what this is.
It's pretty simple, that I don't know if you need the underlying bill in particular. The bill's got all kinds of stuff that is labor related.
Yeah.
And I'm reasonably comfortable with everything in the bill to be able to support it, with the exception of one thing, and that one thing is the card check provision. Now, by card check, that is the provision that to refresh that
Right.
allows a union organizer to collect signatures from potential union members. And if they hit 50%, if card check is in effect, then the union becomes the union for that particular workplace regardless. That is not permitted under the National Labor Relations Act, because with federal employees, it still has to go to an election. The only way a card check can be done is, first, the union has to get a 30% base in order to proceed. And then after that, even if they get 50%, it still has to go to a vote. Only if the only exception is if the employer at that point agrees to become the union. The union connection is agreed to by the employer. Otherwise, it has to go to an election. My problem with this bill, and this document that I gave you by way of background, was prepared by the University of Vermont on H308, which was a bill in 2021 that would have done some of the same things. And I think they make a very detailed case as to why it's not a good idea. My principal reason why it's not a good idea is because it removes elections. It removes the ability of the people being organized to vote, and to vote in a secret ballot as to whether they do or do not want the union. There have been innumerable cases that have been documented in the past when card check was legal, and that was back in the 40s and so on and so forth. But there have been cases even where multiple signatures have been obtained by the union that the union has not won an election. And often is the case because the employer says, well, you haven't been fully informed. We haven't had a chance to present our side of the case. You haven't had a chance to hear all the sides and make any decisions. And there have been innumerable cases in which the union has gotten 50% on the basis of signatures, but actually has lost the election when the election has occurred. And there are two arguments either way. One is once hearing all of the information from both sides, the potential people who are being organized make a decision and decide not to vote for the union. The unions also, though, often claim that, well, they've been coerced, they've been given false information, they've been, and so on, that the employer has gone beyond his or her authority doing what's right. But there are provisions for that. There are penalties for that. there are safeguards for that. And there is, when an employer goes over the line and does things like that, there are sanctions. In this case, we're talking about municipal employees who aren't subject to the National Labor Relations Act. And we're talking about typically very small employers who don't operate in interstate commerce and therefore are not subject to the federal law. And so this would be administered by the state labor relations board. But the rules as far as elections and secret ballot are the same thing. And my objection to card check is it eliminates secret ballot. Many of the cases that have occurred in the past have been where union folks who are organizers have gone beyond what they should have. And the issue is the potential coercion of people, prevent false information, employees not getting the full facts of both sides before making their decision. And that's my biggest concern. The unions that we know in Vermont are typically fine. They're not bad unions, but there are bad unions that can organize Vermont employees. I know that based on my own experience years ago when I operated a private security company. And I was organized at one of my operations out of state by an organization, by a union, it was the Allied Security Officers, I can't remember the exact name, but they were owned by one of the 5 families in New York. It was a mafia-related organization that tried to organize. So there are bad unions out there. We escaped, but there are others who did not. They were subsequently, it was 4 or 5 years after I organized a union, were convicted, federal court, went to jail. But these things happen. And this is to me very much like you want to vote in a presidential election. And 2 guys come up to you as you're going out of work and say, you want to vote for President Trump or President Biden, don't you? And encourage you to sign it. You sign up then and there, and that's it. You don't get to go to the polls and you don't get to vote in a free and fair election. That's not right. Now, one of the arguments, the counter to that, the unions, is that, well, the employers have the right to get you at work and force you to attend a union meeting, an anti-union meeting.
Right, which we have
And that's
prohibited
been
in
taken
other
care
parts
of. That is dealt with in another provision of the clause. So that, in my mind, counters it. The
Yeah,
other,
you support the first 2 sections.
I will support the rest of the bill. I will not support this or a bill with this in it. That's it in a nutshell. I want to see that we have a fair playing field. To me, elections are part of a fair playing field. That's it in a nutshell.
Right, and my understanding is that this provided for that, but I guess I'm.
So the card, I mean, it's not in front of me. So the card
Yeah, I need
check
to,
is 50, one more than 50%.
right, 51.
And
If
and
they sign
the
up on a card,
identity of
that's-
the people is known.
Yes.
To me, that's a
Yeah.
disadvantage to the people because they have to.
No,
it's
they
not
would
private.
make that known to whoever the union organizer is. And if they have 51%, then the union is the union for that workplace. No election is held.
Okay,
I believe an election needs to be held.
so how do you get to the election point now? You know,
Right now, the union has to collect, I believe it's 30% of the workforce to say if they want a union, and that in effect starts the process.
and that's a list of people.
Yeah.
But
Who've
so-
agreed, who signed up.
okay, so that's a public.
But still, regardless, even if you have the 30%, it's like, a nominating petition that we have in elections. Because
You don't have
everybody
to vote
signs,
for me.
right, because everybody signs the nominating petition, doesn't mean they're gonna vote for you.
Right. Right.
When it comes to the actual election, after they see who the other candidates are and what the other candidates' positions are.
So you want it to remain as it is with the 30% requirement and then the vote?
Correct. I want it to be the same as it applies to the federal election, except in Vermont, it's the state labor relations board rather than the national labor relations that supervises the
So
election.
if we do card check, then some organizations in Vermont that are covered by the federal standard would be going by one system.
That exists right now.
Yeah, okay.
That exists right now.
Oh, how does that work?
Well, again, if you are a business in interstate commerce, then you fall under the National Labor Relations Act, and it's the
So our
federal
big
board
employers
that
are
oversees
not.
the union process, the election process.
But
So-
what now?
So those employers wouldn't have this change even if
No.
we.
No, they can't. It's against federal law, or it's against the rules of the National Labor
So what-
Relations Board going back, oh gosh. Well, if at various court decisions, but certainly back to the late sixties, it really began in the forties, the move against card check. For
And
the same
that's-
reasons that I mentioned.
That's if you do interstate commerce, which is honestly, anybody who has a website.
Anybody who,
It's almost anybody. So these are typically very small employers who, have no, and I don't know the details of how they make the determination, but apparently it's a relatively small number, and it's municipalities.
Okay,
It's municipal people who form, and of course, the state unions and so on are not governed by national labor relations, they're governed by the state.
well,
But is there anywhere now that we are this significantly different? I mean, my sense is that the State Labor Relations Board and the federal are basically doing the same,
Yes, that's my
the same
understanding.
law. That this
would
would
it
be
help
the
to have
first-
Damien here for this conversation? Because we had dismissed Damien because we were gonna be, would it be useful to have Damien if he's still
Yeah, and
around?
Damon was obviously the one. who
Yeah,
drafted the
obviously
amendment,
Damon,
but,
right.
You certainly could hear from him, but might add some
Yeah.
detail that I might not have.
Yeah, because my understanding was that actually this bill enables private balloting and being able to do this over several days. So I guess I'm a little confused.
No, card check is somebody has, it's like our petition. You go out and stand in the
Right.
farmer's market and you can stand in front of people and say, sign this
Well,
or not.
you have,
but-
if it's a public opportunity to sign
I
up.
mean, the classic.
But I thought the balloting was private.
No.
There is no
The
balloting.
election.
In
No,
card check,
there
there
is
no
Oh,
balloting.
there is no election at
There
all.
is
no
no
election.
election.
Sorry.
You just sign the petition.
And then you are, once you get to 50+1%,
Yeah, and-
you are organized.
And this is when I got shut off talking about, it's pretty intimidating to have a 6'4" organizer,
Right.
come up to you in the parking lot on your way out and say, I need you to sign this petition.
Yes, I.
Whereas in the old structure, I might sign your petition, but when I got in that ballot booth, and I've worked on, there are good and bad employers and there are good and bad unions. And then there are individual people and sometimes enthusiastic people, even when they're working for us, step over the line.
And, don't take this as an anti-union amendment. It's not an anti-union amendment. I remember as a kid going with my grandfather, there was a union ironworker rodman to the union halls when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. And he was able to retire with dignity because he was a union member his entire life. So I'm not anti-union, but I am anti-coercion.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I would appreciate having Damien weigh in. Any
Yeah.
other thoughts? You're also in the same
did
spot.
VLCT weigh in on this? I don't remember.
I know, I spoke to Karen Warren, and I know they're opposed to this.
I don't
When they
remember.
woke in, spoke
She
loudly
chose
or
to
I
not, I
don't know.
believe they chose to not weigh in on it.
Yeah.
It may be because many of those towns have unions.
You're correct.
And you don't want to
Well-
set off your unions. I mean,
Yeah, no, I know,
I mean,
and I worked with the unions.
Yeah.
No.
Right. So I would suggest, is Damien able to join us or not? Okay.
Well, will we have him tomorrow? Because
We-
this would be tomorrow, right?
Yeah, I
Today on
don't
the-
know. Let me just
Okay.
look at our schedule because we're gonna hear from Thomas Chittenden tomorrow morning or Friday morning, one or the other, depending
And
on
that's
our
on his amendment to.
time
100.
frame. He's toning his amendments still, although I think it's.
Tony,
I
I
don't
think.
know
there's
why I
only
just-
three numbers. The only
Tony and
owning is the three numbers.
Damon can be here in 2 minutes. Great.
All right, cool. Let's give him
We
2
are
minutes.
close to the stairway.
I'm gonna go hit the loo. And then let us, so let's hang tight for a minute or two and then we'll have Damien join us. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Great, okay.
Run,
So you and I,
You're a quick one.
We're close to the stairs, but not the bathrooms.
Right.
Wait for IBM to arrive to fix my computer. All weekend, I was not able for hours at a time. You know, I had to reboot constantly.
Oh.
And there's apparently it's a mechanical problem, and so they're replacing the
Whatever.
keyboard.
And they're actually coming to you?
When I bought this computer, and I've done this all the time.
Yeah,
It's worth buying, at least with Lenovo and IBM Pod.
yes,
You can buy a plan where it is a next day service.
that's wonderful.
And, you know, what they do is you call them, you go through the diagnostics, if it's a mechanical problem, they drop ship the parts to someone in your area who they contracted with, and that person that calls and comes.
Oh, that's
to fix it.
wonderful.
And
Like
it-
a company, you're acting like
Yeah, yeah,
that. Cause I was thinking, cause I need an IT person.
It is really a benefit.
Yeah,
It's really
iPad is
it's
shot.
worth it.
and Apple doesn't have that.
No, my iPad is, it won't do Zoom.
Oh.
Now, but last week, no.
Well,
and-
that's the state iPad.
Yeah,
They should
Chatty
help
said
you.
he'd get me a new one, and then last week, it didn't upload emails for about 5 hours. I clean out everything that's in there. It's still, last week, I couldn't get my committee page to open, so I'm operating on a handicap with that. And I just gotta tie down Shadi and say, I need it.
Yeah.
Because it's not,
And if you've had it for many years, it's,
it's been replaced once, everybody, right before COVID, they all got
that's
replaced,
a
because
good
I
idea.
remember,
yeah, so 3
calling
years
and
is,
saying, what happened to all of those, because the schools need them. And, you know, could we help out getting some computers out of the kids? And they were sitting, I think in the Pink Lady, they were sitting somewhere.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Have we heard anything from Keisha this morning?
We've been texting.
Okay, so she
She had a good night.
had a good night.
She mentioned that with her out, I'm in charge.
Okay.
That's great. Go for it.
I need David.
There's two different, so your phone rings.
To what when the phone is?
It's 2 minutes, but then your phone rings or you get a text from another committee. We tried to work for years to say, we meet in the morning, you get him in the afternoon.
Right.
I mean, finance trying to get, we got one tax drafter. You can have Abby all morning, but we need her in the afternoon because we don't have the flexibility.
Right.
I'll try to find your agenda for tomorrow.
I was. It's right here. It got buried under.
Here he is.
Right.
You want a cough drop?
No, it's this tip, I just have I have a troublesome larynx. It just shuts down on me.
Sometimes.
Thank you for coming.
That is true.
You're welcome.
I don't know if I have any Rover tests.
Regarding the very lengthy amendment you drafted for me last week.
Yes,
David,
very.
we need you.
Yes.
We're discussing Randy's amendment. And we would love clarification on a couple interplay issues.
We didn't really talk about this in committee, I think. Not,
We talked about
but
hardship.
not a lot. Try that.
Not about this federal stuff.
Guaranteed soothing Swiss herbs.
So David,
Yes,
if
ma'am.
you could. Anne asked a question, and Wendy asked a question.
This is on
Which-
hardship.
Yes.
Tina, yeah. So currently, Randy is proposing we return to the status quo. right?
Yeah, maintain the status quo. So,
Right, whip. And card check. Anne asked a question about the interplay. But well, ask your question.
I don't even remember. Right now, the State Labor Relations Board does non-interstate commerce, but do we vary significantly from the federal labor relations laws? And it seems to me this might be the first big departure.
well, so it's hard for me to say exactly how we vary from the National Labor Relations Act, because it's not something I work with a great deal. I can tell you right now, card check is not permitted under the National Labor Relations Act, so this would be
A departure
from the National Labor Relations Act. I mean, by their nature, the NLRA and State Labor Relations Acts cover different pools of employees, so the issues are often different. For example, with municipal employees, we prohibit strikes by public safety employees because of potential issues there, in a way that you might not see strikes prohibited in the private sector. So there are departures.
But we usually put binding arbitration in there, right?
We include binding arbitration, not every state does. So it's actually interesting. This morning I was actually going through my files from it was 2015 when we considered taking away the right to strike for teachers. I think Senator Clarkson was still in the House at that point.
In which year?
2015.
Yeah, I came over here on 17.
So in that year, the House considered legislation that would have taken away the right for teachers to strike and for school boards to impose a contract, which are what are commonly referred to as the hammers that each side has at the end of the process to try to drive their point home. That was going to be replaced with binding arbitration. When we looked at other states, what was interesting is that for alternative dispute resolution procedures, it's really across the board. Under the NLRA, I'm not sure what the alternative dispute resolution procedures are as far as mandatory procedures, but it's very common with public bargaining to require certain mandatory procedures for dispute resolution. But from state to state, those could be as little as mediation to as much as binding arbitration with, go straight to binding arbitration with no steps in the middle. And Vermont has a 3-step process. So there is variation from state to state and jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So I guess the point of this long rambling answer is that when you're looking at collective bargaining laws, it's not always apples to apples. Certainly with currently the status quo for both the state and the National Labor Relations Act is card check is not permitted. So this would be a departure.
So, and remind us how many other states have card check? Any?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I can't remember from my notes because I believe that we had testimony about that.
You might have, it would have been from the unions.
Yeah, right. I can't remember.
No, I don't. But just a question on terminology. So I just wrote down from a conversation that we had before you were here that federal card check of 30% goes to a vote. But maybe that's not card check.
Yeah, no,
that's card something else.
So
if you get 30% sign up,
so that's
automatically
the petition for
so that's
an
a
election,
petition. Okay.
and we have that. So
that's current law.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand.
And that's also.
Yeah, so card check is not a great term.
It's a terrible
an
term.
antiquated term, and it doesn't actually describe what what's happening. So another term that's been proposed that I think is more accurate, I don't know if it's the best term, is majority sign up. And what that
Majority
basically
sign up?
means is, yeah, it means that if you get a majority on your petition, which is what the bill is proposing,
Okay.
then and the petition names a union, then that union is elected as the representative. The current status quo is as soon as you clear that 30% threshold, even if you get 100% of the bargaining unit, it doesn't matter how many, once you're past that 30% threshold, then it goes to an election unless the employer voluntarily recognizes the union. So, and that does happen sometimes, but it's not common. So typically, once you get past that 30% threshold, you then get to an election situation.
Right.
And that's a very regulated process. What 102 proposes to do, and what Senator Brock's amendment would take out, is to provide for state employees, judiciary employees, teachers, municipal employees, and then for private sector employees who are not covered by the National Act, which right now is virtually no one, but because of Section 2 of this bill, which would extend this to farms and domestic workplaces with more than 5 employees,
Right,
or 5 or more employees, you would then have card check on larger agricultural operations,
which are interstate.
Well, but they're not covered by the NLRA. So the agricultural work has been exempt from the NLRA, as has domestic work. So anywhere the NLRA doesn't go, the states are allowed to go if they choose to. So there's no requirement. Many states don't permit collective bargaining in the public sector. Vermont is one of the states that has chosen to permit that across the public sector. In other states, you might see it for teachers, for example, but not for police officers or something like that.
Can I just make sure I'm understanding? So state employees, teachers, municipal employees, judicial, and then because they're not in the NLRA, agricultural and domestic.
Yeah, and that's because of Section 2 of this bill.
Okay.
Would extend coverage under the State Labor Relations Act to those workers. And currently, I just want to make sure I get this right, because we are on the record here, and I want to make sure that I don't misstate this, but the State Labor Relations Act defines employer. So in order to be subject to it, your workplace has to have, let's just see here, 5 or more employees in it. So
anybody under 5 employees
Under
would
5,
not be subject to
not subject
this
to
provision
it.
at all.
But that is a huge number of
Huge,
Vermont
yeah.
employers that, what I found, North Dakota, California, Illinois, California again,
Yeah.
Oklahoma, New Jersey, New Hampshire, and Oregon, all
Yeah.
have card check laws, but they all are for public employees.
They are for public employees
They
or
are
are not?
Well, North Dakota is only for teachers, public agencies, including fire departments, applies to state political subdivisions of the state and units of local government. And then there's an educational labor, and then California is K-12 educators, court interpreters, and other trial employees. I don't know that I want to get into a jurisdictional thing with the courts. They get really touchy. Everybody else is public employees.
Yeah, and that's common. So state law generally covers public employees. Federal law covers private sector. And there are exceptions in there. There's bargaining laws for other groups under the federal law, and then some states have, like what Vermont has, which is basically you could think of it as a mini NLRA. which is our State Labor Relations Act. This was enacted back when interstate commerce, one, there wasn't as much interconnectivity, and two, the Supreme Court had a narrower view of what interstate commerce was. Over the years, that view has gradually expanded from the Depression era, when the national regulations over wage and hour and labor started to roll out. And it's gradually expanded since then to now basically encompass almost all private sector work. There is still the possibility that you have someone who their business only does business in Vermont. They deal in Vermont products, and they're not shipping out of state. They don't have clients out of state, and their products are not in the stream of interstate commerce. It's rare, but it's possible. And then in Vermont, to get beyond that, you need to get to 5 or more employees, which for those businesses is increasingly unlikely. So to my knowledge, we don't have private sector employers unionized under the State Labor Relations Act. With the amendment in Section 2, there's the possibility that they would be, because our agricultural employers are not subject to collective bargaining laws now. So you could see larger dairies and other agricultural operations unionized under Section 2. But by and large,
that's a big question mark too, if it would happen. I mean, we are, with this bill, if it passes, we're enabling that opportunity, but it's not a guarantee it'll happen.
No, but I can see what the language barriers. I'm more concerned about an employer with 10 employees. You get 5 people that sign a card.
You mean who signed up for the union?
Yeah, I mean, those are pretty small businesses. That's almost every restaurant, every retail outlet.
And our municipalities. I mean, we have.
Well, I don't want, if we wanted to regulate public employees, then we're talking about taxes and our revenue source and what it does. But when you get to 10 employees, we are making, and we've outlawed the private, meetings, coercion meetings.
The captive audience.
The captive audience.
Section 1.
It's a big step, and we really didn't talk about this much. The league talked, but we didn't hear.
I was actually looking back at all my notes. We did hear from Liz and David, and we heard from quite a few people, actually. David Mickenberg, we heard from.
Yeah,
Liz
but he represents the union.
No, I'm just, I don't know. We heard from
on this specific topic. I am just starting to understand who's left out, which are all our big employers.
Yep.
But this would be hospitals.
Well,
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think
No, hospitals.
They are under the federal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Why? Because interstate commerce?
yeah, so a hospital is in the stream of interstate commerce because, one, they're buying goods from out of state.
fine.
2, they're contracting
So if
with.
my local store is buying goods from
So-
out of state,
Right, so
and they're-
even if you take one of our downtown businesses here,
yeah,
where the definition of interstate commerce has gotten so broad because they're doing business with tourists and they're buying and selling goods across state lines. Many of them now have online retail.
sure.
Yep, and they're,
So they're
hotels are
essentially
marketing
like that.
themselves across state lines.
Okay,
They're all falling under National Labor Relations Act. It
okay,
is,
so that narrows it.
the State Labor Relations Act has become increasingly narrow in its scope to the point that I don't to my knowledge, it's not currently used. But this bill would,
That's who we heard from.
would expand
Yeah, but not all.
its reach because it would reach groups of employees who are currently not reached by any labor relations act.
Okay.
So it, at a high,
In that sense, it's fine.
yeah, no, it's fine on that regard. I guess what I had
Is
misunderstood,
Keisha listening? I don't want to cause her further distress.
I don't, is
I think she would be up there.
I think
No,
she
because
would
we
be.
will take,
Okay.
I think if it's okay with you, we'll take a vote on this tomorrow morning when Keisha is able to join us. But it's important for us to understand it and the implications, and
Right.
it's great to have this additional time, and thank you, Damien, for making yourself available.
Sure.
My understanding is that so I guess I had misunderstood. So that this majority sign-up opportunity, and as it differs from what is currently available, is that if you get 30% interest and signing up now, that triggers an election, which is a private ballot or not?
Yes.
It's a secret ballot election.
Okay, so that's
And that would stay under the new law.
that was my understanding, is that we still would have a private ballot. Is that
You
not
would-
correct?
You would have
To
secret
confirm
ballot.
them to sign up?
No, so you would have secret ballot. But
Then I do.
if your petition managed to get, so we'll take, a workplace with 20 people. If your petition manages to get 11 people saying, yes, we want to have a union and we've specified the union on this petition, then provided those were all valid signatures from people in the bargaining unit, that's something that there could be an open question on.
Right.
But provided those are all valid signatures for people in the bargaining unit and the petition specifies the union, under this bill, that union would get certified because you've got 50% plus
Plus
one
one,
employee.
Without an election.
And you wouldn't have a secret ballot after that.
So then where does the secret ballot piece kick in if we're preserving it?
So with that, let's take
No,
that
'cause I
same
had
workplace
understood.
with 20 employees. And instead of getting 11 signatures, you get 8. So you're above the 30% threshold, which would have been 6 employees, but you're below that 50% plus 1 threshold. At that point, what you do is the petition goes to the labor board. The labor board then schedules an election, and then you have a secret ballot election. And at that point, it's a majority of the people voting in the election determine whether or not. you
So
get
we
the
really have 2 options here. I mean, it
Well, there's one
maintains
already,
aspects.
and we're adding an option.
Yeah, we're
Right.
adding an additional option.
Yeah.
We're not taking away.
You're not taking away any
Anything.
options, but the difference here is that you're narrowing the secret ballot, the instances when
Right.
secret ballot
Right.
would occur.
We're eliminating the secret ballot if it's 50
If
plus
it's
1.
50.
Right.
So, okay, that had been my mistake. I knew we still had a secret ballot opportunity, so okay.
But
thank you for
only
that.
if you get more than 30, but less than 50.
Right, between 30 and 50, 31 to 50.
If you don't get 50, then you've got 30, then you can go.
If
Right.
you eliminate hardship, as these particular sections provide, then you're doing exactly what happens in the federal elections by the under the National Labor Relations Act, which says essentially that you're always going to have an election before you have a union certified. That's it, nothing more.
Okay.
And what we have now, and what the
That's
current
what we have
unions
now.
were established.
That's right. That's
So
exactly right.
All right.
when,
Just a question, you said regarding the signatures, valid signatures, but that's a question. Does
So,
this provide
uh,
protection
So
to certify the signatures?
there's always, under this, there is the possibility of challenging. For example, what's happened in the past, in some cases, is the employer disputes who's in the bargaining unit. And so the union says it's these 12 employees and the employer says, no, it's those 10, or maybe says, no, those 12 employees should be part of that bargaining unit. So there is the possibility that there's disagreement over the bargaining unit. And then that disagreement gets settled by the board. Under this law, what would happen again, at this, or under this bill, excuse me, it's not a law yet. Under this bill, what would happen is once that was resolved, if you had 50% plus one, you're
Your union's
certified. But there's always the question, you can't have Mickey Mouse signing your petition.
Right.
So it's not just counting signatures, it has to be signatures of actual employees who are actually in the bargaining unit. And this has been, there was an instance, one of the cases in the labor board that settled kind of the extent of the Teachers Labor Relations Act, related to the question of whether a nurse who had to be licensed and certified by the state board to work in a school bargained under that act or with the non-licensed municipal employees. And the teachers union said she's licensed and certified, and the statute says licensed and certified. She should be part of the teachers bargaining unit. So we're including her in the bargaining unit. The school board said no, she should be in the bargaining unit with the bus drivers and the administrative staff and the custodial staff, et cetera. And that went to the labor board, and the labor board resolved it and said, well, the law says licensed and certified, so we think the legislature meant teachers and other licensed and certified personnel. But that's the sort of dispute you can get into. Another one in the state was whether sworn law enforcement officers should be part of the non-management bargaining unit or have their own bargaining unit, because they're not state troopers, but they also have very different responsibilities from other non-management.
Right. Yeah.
And the labor board said, no, if we do that, there's this question of over fragmentation, too many little unions for each little group. They're different, but they're not different enough. We're going to keep them in the main union.
Montpelier, were the assistant chiefs, firefighters, or were they part of management?
Yeah.
Right.
The city lost.
Yeah. So there are these questions you'll commonly get into. That's not eliminated either in the bill. What happens though is if you get 50% plus one of the bargaining unit, then
And the bargaining unit are the eligible employees.
Right.
All right,
Right.
but it leaves out every employer with 5 or fewer employees. It leaves out any business that has customers, buys product from out of state, buys,
if they're doing business in the stream of interstate commerce.
That's, well, that
and
could drive
is-
things up
that
a
is
court along.
most, at this point, nearly all private businesses would fall into the interstate commerce. And many of the ones who would not are below that 5 employee threshold for the
It
state
is
labor
conceivable
relations
that there
act.
could be some, but probably relatively few and all relatively small.
Right, so it
Right,
is, if
exactly.
this bill would only, it's
Except
really
for
only
Farm. with our
taking in public sector employers that aren't presently unionized. I mean, the
Right,
bigger groups are already unionized, have been for
Right,
years.
the state and the judiciary are mostly unionized at this point. We've added in recent years, we've created bargaining units under the State Labor Relations Act for county employees who have statewide interests, common interests. So like sheriffs who
I was gonna say
paid
the
by
sheriffs are
state,
union, part of the
state's
sheriffs.
attorneys,
Right.
et cetera, where they're in that weird quasi-county, quasi-state employee situation.
I remember we gave the state's attorneys the
Deputy state.
ability to union.
Right.
Yeah, the deputy
So
state's attorneys and
With
the,
this,
and the transport sheriffs are union.
yeah, those are the state paid deputies.
Right.
So we've extended bargaining rights to them. The state colleges and UPM are under the State Labor Relations
Right.
Act. So theoretically, if there's a bargaining unit that hasn't unionized there, they could take advantage of card check. With school districts, I think most schools are unionized at this point, but there might be 1 or 2 that are not. Or what happens is they decertify their existing union, And then a few years later, they decide they want to unionize again. In that case, they could use card check under the bill as it's currently written. And then municipal employers of the public sector are likely to be the ones to see the most impact from card check, because I think they have the most bargaining units that could potentially.
Which is why VLCT chose not to weigh in on this.
Which is just.
But
not
I mean,
helpful.
if we're just looking at those towns, they've,
Well,
they got
Lots
a
of them have
volunteer firefighter, they aren't town employees, I don't think.
So
They're volunteers, you've got
lots
Road
of,
department.
the road.
Right, public works, if there is any.
so, yeah, our municipal employees in Woodstock have moved to unionization pretty much across the board. And our firefighters, the EMT, we have now 8 professionals.
And that again,
and
is
they're
part
all
of the point is they've done so under the present process with a vote. And so, you know, it's not that the vote is impeding them from doing that. You have the numerous examples where that in fact has happened. And one of the arguments that we heard, of course, is that employers, by holding these forced meetings that people have to attend mandatorily, have an unfair advantage in terms of providing information to employees. And we've taken that away in this bill. That remains. They can't do that.
But the one thing I thought this actually, I had understood that this adds in the one additional opportunity, which is if you can sign up 51%, you automatically are formed as a union.
Precisely, and that's
with no vote.
Precisely.
So
There's
that
no-
adds a
no
benefit.
vote. Well, it's a question of whether it's a benefit or whether or not it offers the ability of those who want to unionize to provide a single source of information without the employee having a chance to do so, or it creates the kind of intimidation scenario that Ann suggests.
Right.
It's very difficult to say no when people are asking you to say yes, and it doesn't appear to hurt.
But there's-
Whereas if you have the privacy of a secret ballot, just as you do in an election for a political person, you have the ability to make your own decision without influence by either party.
I understand that, but there's nothing in this bill that prohibits employers from sharing their viewpoint as much as.
Presumably, if they know about it or if they have the opportunity to do so. And
Well,
that
this
again,
would not
depending
happen or
on
not.
how the election, there certainly have been elsewhere elections that have happened where the employer becomes aware of it fairly late in the process. It doesn't have the ability to react. Now, again, there's the argument that I hear that, well, employers have the ability to hire these union busting consultants and so on. But the kinds of businesses we're talking about that would be eligible for this card check, that's nonsensical. It's, you know, our larger public employee organizations are already unionized. We're talking about small organizations and we're talking about firms.
Right. So I'm cognizant that we're at time. And I know we have to do some work on this. David, you're in the room. Do you have anything you want to add to this conversation?
No, David Mickenberg on behalf of Working Vermont. We would be opposed, obviously, to the removal of card check. It's sort of a value question. You know, do we think that it makes sense for workers to be able to help facilitate unionization? I think I would say yes. It's better all around, and so I think the removal of this, as specified, there could be decertification of larger units. This would then make it easier to establish the unit in those cases, and even in the case where it's a smaller unit, I think it's appropriate if a majority of the workers want to form a union. This is an acknowledgement of that, and so I think it would be a mistake to take this out of the bill.
We require that all union organizers not be over 5'5" feet tall.
Oh,
Whatever you want, Senator. You want?
And by the way,
I would just barely make the.
Yeah, but that's
Although
not
I'm sure-
intimidating. 6'4" is intimidating.
there's a document that included that I believe was distributed by Scott, and that's a document prepared by UVM's Human Resources.
Yeah,
And
it's
that goes into a detail of explaining the background about card check, National Relations Act, why the federal government requires what it does now, and then talk specifically about it. You should have a copy of it. It was used last year, I think, when the House was looking at this at H308. It was prepared by UVM. And my sense is it's a good document. It's a fair document.
And I think, I'm sure that the AFL and others that have been proponents of this along with us and others in the organization are going to want to at least provide some context for why they also, I would assume, not speaking for them to oppose the.
So
Is this-
just to clarify the record, I want to make sure that it's clear that the bill permits only elections by card check, decertification. Once the union's been decertified, you could elect a new union by card check, but you cannot decertify an existing collective bargaining agent by card check under the bill or majority sign. I just want to make sure that's clear for the record, so that there isn't any discussion that this would allow.
So what, okay,
So
so if it's not
decertification is
addressed in this
basically-
bill, let's not complicate
Yeah,
ourselves
it's,
with it.
I just want to be clear, this only applies to election of a new union by card check when there is no existing union.
It only, well, not election, it's not the right term.
Selection,
Selection.
selection and certification
S
of a
in
new
front of it.
union
Right.
when there is no existing union representation. by the
This
bargaining
is
unit.
not Pittsburgh, where which union represents you. I mean, the steel workers, I assume they still represent the Barry City employees. Maybe they've changed, but that's.
Things have changed.
Yeah.
Who was representing them?
So I think it's after time. We have to turn to preparing for Keisha not being able to be here. And I want to make sure.
Some of us have a meeting at 12:30 to deal with liquor.
Liquor, I thought you were dealing with local option tax.
Say, yeah, it was a
Oh, oh,
local option liquor tax.
That's 12:30 for us in finance.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's liberate you to go and get that. We'll vote on this tomorrow morning if you don't mind, Randy,
Fine.
just because I want Keisha as the listed reporter of the bill to weigh in. And let's reconvene. So I know you have a meeting 8 to 9, is that right, tomorrow morning?
Tomorrow is Thursday, isn't it?
Oh, tomorrow's Thursday, right? Right, don't worry about it. Right, tomorrow we could conceivably meet at 8:30. Is that a burden? I think we're fine with meeting at 9. We're on deck for 9, and I think we're
We have
okay.
9 to noon.
Okay, right. I was just trying to fit additional things in, but I think we're okay. Yeah, well, there's question. Anyway, that's great. And so we're going to begin tomorrow morning with the amendments to the bill that's come out of the House on the adult use and medical cannabis programs, the miscellaneous amendments to that. And
We're
if
gonna
we
deal with
need
flavored
time,
cannabis.
if we want to chat about 102, we're going to chat about the Chittenden amendment on Friday morning. But if we want to chat about the amendment to 102, we can fit it, I mean, we need to. We'll
That's
discuss
this
it tomorrow. We'll fit it in.
Right, is the assumption that we're going to deal with 102 on the floor?
Yes,
on Friday?
tomorrow. No, we're passing over 102 today.
Are we dealing with it tomorrow or?
My understanding at the moment is that we're doing 102 and 100 tomorrow.
And 100 tomorrow, because
Yes.
somebody said it was Friday, the last time I heard.
No,
On-
Then how are we?
my
only
understanding,
hearing from Chittenden on Friday.
because he's not proposing his amendment until third reading. He wants, my understanding is he has said he wants to see how the discussion goes during the course of second reading.
I've got to give him a.
Whatever you want to do to